G'day, May 40 here. So if you've watched this show more than once, you know I'm a very respectable man. I've led a very respectable life, and yet I don't get no respect. I am grooming the future leaders of Western civilization. And now suddenly, after years of my honorable labor in this endeavor, now like grooming's this bad word that people use for kitty diddlers. And I'm a respectable man. I meant grooming in the traditional sense of the word, that you were raising, you were educating, you were informing, you were mentoring people, right? I stand for the positive type of grooming, not that bad grooming. I had this 1982 Dodge van. It was like 1 ton. It got 10 miles to the gallon. It was my groomer van, and I just drove around the neighborhood. I'd play some ice cream music, and like I'd groom. But the positive types of grooming, not that bad grooming. It's the bloody left, mate. It's the cultural Marxists and the secular humanists and the atheistic communists. They take all these respectable words like gay and grooming, and they turn them into something bad, something reprehensible. And I've been grooming young Stephen J. James for years now, but the good kind of grooming, not that bad stuff. I mean, people with their mind in the gutter. Yeah, we need men like 40 on top. Absolutely, but on top in the spiritual sense. Not on top in some grody, disgusting... oh, God, it just upsets me so much what the secular humanists and the cultural Marxists and the atheistic communists, what they've done to our very respectable language. Oy vey. So I was tired after my 2-hour interview appearance on Stephen J. James' show Sunday. But I'm Mr. Open and Honest, right? If you know anything about me, you say 40, Mr. Open and Honest. And so when I began my own stream following that, I said, I admit I am tired. And this is how I perceive the reason why I'm tired. It wasn't the issues that were raised. It was trying to formulate answers that would be the most useful and the least harmful to me and to the audience, right? There's inevitably going to be some, total loser who's going to be watching some of these live streams, and they're just like one cue away from going out and doing something horrific. So I try to operate these live streams to the extent that they have any effect on someone, right? They have a positive effect. They don't detonate people to go out and be antisocial. And then as I think about why was that interview with Stephen J. James so exhausting, because it was very familiar topics that I've discussed hundreds of times. There was nothing tricky about his questions, right? There's nothing dishonorable. And I'm very proud of my appearance on Stephen J. James, but God, that sounds defensive. So I noticed that my mind naturally works to try to portray my exertion and my fatigue there in the best possible light. Guys, I was only tired because I was such a servant of the truth. It's just because I was so open and honest on that Stephen J. James stream. It was only because I wanted to be of service to you. It was only because I wanted to help and inform. It was only because I was motivated by the highest aspirations. So I notice how my mind just starts working to try to frame everything that I say and do in the best possible light. And then when I get tired of that approach, then I think, well, what's an excuse? And I say, oh yeah, I haven't been sleeping well the last 3 days. For some reason, when I put that bloody CPAP on at night, I just can't get to sleep. And so I've not been sleeping until about 2 or 3 a.m. And that's when I've given up on the CPAP. I've given up on like the 10-inch wedge. I go back and forth between wedges, the CPAP, the CPAP and the mouth guard. And that mouth guard has got this, it sends my lower jaw forward. So now, because it sends my lower jaw forward, it's created all these spaces in my front teeth. And if I'm anything, I'm a man with good teeth. But now I have spaces in my front teeth. And I think it's negatively affecting my ratings and my Q score. Because the mouth guard sends that lower jaw forward, which is supposed to like open up breathing passages, but now, and I've had the same mouth guard for like 4 or 5 years. You're supposed to replace it every 3 months, but this one's still fair dinkum. Here it is. Like it's a very respectable mouth guard, right? Gotten really good use out of it for about 4 years. And so see how the lower portion, it brings my lower jaw forward. So it's like this. It's very respectable mouth guard. God. Best thing about this mouth guard is that you can also drink a little bit with it. Most mouth guards you can't, but it brings our teeth forward, and somehow the combination with the CPAP. So the CPAP's blowing air up through my nose, and then the mouth guard seems to be, opening my lips at night when I'm trying to go to sleep, and so I get a dry mouth. So I swig some water, which then makes me want to go up to the bathroom, and it's just a self-defeating cycle. There's some combination of what I'm doing. Last 3 nights, just not sleeping. Then about between 2 and 3 a.m., I just give up with the CPAP, lie down and fall asleep. Now, it's not good quality sleep. If I can sleep with the CPAP on, it's fantastic. If I go to sleep without the CPAP, then the odds are about 30% that I'll wake up with a headache that lasts all day. And so I just haven't felt myself the last 3 days. Like yesterday, just feeling really weak. I had important things to do. Like, where was my strength? Am I from Maryland? Bro, I am from Currumbong, Australia. Am I from Maryland? So it must be the lack of sleep. It was only for honorable reasons that I was fatigued. It was only because I wanted to be of service to you. It's only because I'm a humble servant of the truth. It's only because I'm just so pro-social. But I said something really insulting. And it's not like me to say something hurtful and insulting. And I said out loud, wow, this made me think it's not in my self-interest to go on Stephen J. James's channel. My God, like what a hurtful thing I said. Couldn't I have expressed that in a more delicate and empathetic manner? It just wasn't impressive. I mean, it wasn't the normal level of concern for others. It just characterizes my life. So people don't like you to change, and I spend a lot more time taking care with my words these days, say compared to 2019, 2018, 2017, 2016. I don't know, as long as I've been blogging back to 1997. So I often have not used much of a filter with my blogging, and sometimes that's that's a good thing, right? Because sometimes when people have no filter, and because I haven't had much sleep the last 3 days, I got no filter. So there are many great things when people have no filter. On the other hand, you can say a lot of ignorant stuff and hurtful stuff. And the chat says, I've listened to you for a bit. You streamed a week ago talking about how the US doesn't have effective anti-drone technology. It made me think that your commentary is a bit ignorant. I'm sure you're right. I'm sure my commentary is more than a bit ignorant. I think you're so inaccurate. Right. So do you think that the United States military has the drone situation under control? I don't know much. Just my sense of things is that we don't have sufficiently effective anti-drone technology. I am not a drone expert, so there you go. But people don't want you to change, because just think about people in your life when they start changing, how tiring that is, right? You might think of your mother as an alcoholic, and then she goes and she gets sober, and then her personality completely changes, and she's not nearly as much fun. She's not nearly as social. She's not nearly the topic of as much gossip, and she starts behaving reasonably and responsibly. And you can choose to make the effort to kind of recalibrate your image of your mother, but that requires cognitive resources that you could perhaps better expend making money or moving ahead with your own life. It's tiring to take into account take seriously people changing, right? You have to put some effort in, and you have to rejigger your mental picture of them. So just as an economical device, we tend to sort people into good for us, bad for us, dangerous for us, mad, bad, dangerous to know, or they're a lot of fun, or this is someone I can rely on. And we put people into these simple categories, and we usually only know people in certain sectors of their life. And so you just might meet Joe at synagogue once a week, and Joe's a great guy. But in business, Joe might be an absolute killer. And when it's with regard to his gambling life, Joe might be behaving in an incredibly, self-destructive manner, but you only know him in one segment of your life. And so you think Joe's a great guy. And that's really easy picture to hold in your mind of Joe. It doesn't require a lot of economic, economizing. Or let's say that there are some dangerous situations in your life and you rely on Joe to keep you safe. And then you find out that Joe beats his girlfriend and cheats on his wife, but you need Joe. So what do? You probably, if you need Joe, you're not going to put a lot of stock in the negative things that you learn about Joe. You just want to ignore it because it's in your interest to ignore it. So if you're honest with yourself, you understand how exhausting it is to take into consideration how people change, and then you have to put some effort in to reconfigure your image of them in your life. And so it's just easier to not want people to change and to refuse to accept the evidence that people are changing. And so there are changes in this show. I'm probably not even aware of many of them, but I do take a lot more care with my words. I do put more emphasis in trying to phrase things so that someone brand new to the show, or someone from this type of life and that type of life, and people all over the world, all over different social communities, will be able to either not be harmed by anything I say, or possibly have a mild benefit. And so the stream is not as free-flowing. It's not as fun. I don't create as much spectacle, right? It's fun when people come on the show and they say outrageous things, and you see them like destroy their lives, and there's a train wreck quality, and there's a compelling nature of that type of live stream. And I've bloody gone and sanitized this stream. Like, why have I made it so hygienic? Because it really started to bother me when I noticed people would come on and they'd say things that were dramatically against their self-interest. And I also noticed that a lot of troubled people were attracted to the stream. And so I should probably take them into consideration, while a normal bloke would hear what I said and be just fine with it. But someone who's troubled and isolated might hear what I said and go off half-cocked. So let's imagine I've made some changes, and some of the people that have been with me along the way don't particularly like it. They have the attitude, 40, you're one of us.
We'll make her one of us. A loving cup, a loving cup. We accept her one of us. We accept her one of us.
So this is from the 1932 movie Freaks. And one of the dwarfs, gets a normie girlfriend, and they accept her as one of us. And I usually love that, because I have a self-defeating tendency to isolate myself, and then that leaves me feeling bereft and lonely. And so, I just wish I could be accepted. And so this rhetoric of one of us, part of it just feels really good to me. But there are all sorts of groups where you don't want to belong to them because they're freaks and they're not good for you. So sometimes when people say one of us, take care. You don't want to be part of this.
Google gobble, google gobble. We accept her, Google gobble, Google gobble. One of us, one of us.
Right. Sometimes the people who accept you, you don't want them in your life. And people who say your speech and your behavior and your choices are unacceptable, they're the very people you want in your life. And you want to reconfigure your speech and your behavior and your choices so that you have more of a chance to fitting in. But if you're going to fit in with this crowd, it's going to be a lot more demanding. So there are some crowds that you can fit in with that will make no onerous demands on you, but usually they're not a crowd that's good for you. The crowd that's good for you will usually make substantial demands on you, and you have to grow up, behave like an adult if you're going to become one of them. But then there are all sorts of freaks say, one of us, you're one of us. Right? I don't give an F, man. I'm just going to burn it all down. I'm going to say what I believe to be true. So some people are on a highly self-destructive streak in life. And so recently, Stephen J. James and Ricardo made some strong critiques of my appearance Sunday on Stephen J. James. And like, why the hell am I talking about this? Am I just like feeding my ego? Oh, they're talking about me. Or is there anything useful to be learned? Is there something that is of value to discussing this? Because right, there's nothing inherently, intrinsically just so compelling about me and my story. But what the heck? Let's see if there's something of value. This is Stephen J. James talking with Brundlefly. Now, Stephen J. James hides his face on his live streams. Brundlefly, aka Ricardo, hides his face on his live streams. They both hide their real names, and they have contempt for people such as myself who are much more discreet and much more careful and put a lot more emphasis on being socially acceptable in the things that I say, because I'm standing here with my real face, my real name. It's a completely different situation. So you may feel, I'm shielded by anonymity, and it's the easiest thing in the world to have contempt for those who use their real name, put their real face on the line, people with something to lose, right? You may not have anything to lose, right? You may be happy to burn all your bridges to polite society because you are just optimizing for truth. And I think optimizing for truth is a good value. It is equally a good value, and sometimes a far more important value, to optimize for connection with the people who are best for you and who you most want to connect with. And frequently, maintaining that kind of connection is more important than optimizing for truth in your public statements on a live stream. So one of the key principles that I live by is my self-interest. And I would be highly distrustful of anyone who does not put their own self-interest as a vital principle for their life. Right? To me, that type of person is dangerous. If you don't care about your own welfare, why would you then expect other people to care about your welfare?
This is like the Luke Ford sphere, a couple of days, really. I've got Luke, followed by Doovid, followed by you, followed by Doovid. It's worked out perfectly.
Yeah. Luke, I saw, I didn't get a chance to watch his appearance. I did watch his Cope Fest, though. I just...
I wanted
a Cope Fest. Right, that's probably a really accurate description of what I was talking about on Sunday, what I'm talking about today. And it's meant disparagingly. It's probably also meant descriptively, but coping is a really good thing to do. Because what's the opposite of coping? Not coping and freaking out and acting out and behaving in a self-destructive manner. So I will cop to it. Yes, this is a Cope Fest. Welcome to my Cope Fest stream. And I do celebrate coping, and I celebrate my own coping. I am pro-coping. I think coping is great, and I think that usually coping is more important than sounding impressive. Right? Coping effectively with life is more important than how you come off on a live stream. Controversial.
Yeah,
Whoa.
Happened to prompt him to... He's like, well, I've just come to...
I don't know. But I've had the experience where I have walked down a street 1,000 times and never felt vulnerable. And then on time 1,001, I felt vulnerable. And it's not clear if it's because I'm coming down with the flu, or I haven't gotten enough sleep, or a conversation with somebody has triggered something in me, or my life situation has changed, or maybe I have increased empathy for some other persons who I'm thinking about, how would they process this kind of discussion? Maybe there is a situational change in my life where I've become more vulnerable. Maybe I've learned to see things from more perspectives. And so now I recognize a vulnerability that I didn't see before. So if you're walking down the street and you're not feeling any vulnerability, and it would be in your self-interest to feel an appropriate amount of vulnerability, feeling invulnerable is not a good strategy, right? That's not a good cope. We should have an appropriate level of vulnerability, and usually we just ignore many of our vulnerabilities. It's only when they're just like thrust in our face that we go, oh yeah, I'm a human being, and there are times when I could fall in a shower and break my neck. Right? There are times when I might get sick, or I might be just reduced to a complete state of helplessness, and I might need to rely on the kindness of strangers. So is there a way that I can conduct myself where the consequences of my choices are more likely to be good for me than bad for me? And I think it's more important to conduct yourself so that the consequences of your words and your choices are more likely to be good for you than to be bad for you, but you still get to appear as a badass. Right? To me, coping is far more important than appearing courageous on a live stream.
To realize, as much as I love SJJ, great friend of the show, like it doesn't serve me. It doesn't serve my interests.
So what's more important, having clarity on my interests? What's more important, pursuing my self-interests versus saying nice things about my virtual friend, Stephen J. James? So it's important not to needlessly hurt other people's feelings. And I understand it was very hurtful to say, hey, it may not be in my interest to appear on Stephen J. James's channel right now. That might be true and hurtful. So what's more important, the truth or saving Stephen J. James's feelings? So not necessarily clear, but in that instance, I think it's more important to at least explore the possibility that there's a painful truth here, that being a guest on the Stephen J. James Christmas special may not be in my best interest right now. Maybe my life has changed over the past year and I haven't fully realized it until now. And so I'm thinking out loud, and I know it's hurtful, but sometimes it's more important to say the truth than to be kind and nurturing. But then I think, wow, 40, you've not always been as respectful. You've not always been as respectful and empathetic and considerate of Stephen's feelings and Ricardo's feelings as you should have been.
Yeah, I so want to talk to you about this. So you have to go back, and at some point you need to watch. Basically, I think it's like the last hour, certainly the last half an hour. I don't know what happened. The topic of Jews came up, and so God forbid, but it's Luke's wheelhouse. He's literally an Orthodox Jew, talks about Jews in the alt-right. I thought it's his topic. I wanted to get some kind of substance for the audience out of him, rather than it just be, you know what Luke's like.
Yes.
I mean, or you know what Luke's evolved into. He's evolved into this person who fence sits, and he dances around the issues, and he's afraid.
So is that an accurate description? I think there's something to that. Right? I kind of fence sat through COVID. I had sympathy for the COVID lockdowns. I had sympathy for the impossible situation that our political and public health leaders were in. At the same time, I thought many of the dissident critiques were powerful. And yeah, I basically sat on the fence. So sometimes in life, it's better to sit on the fence. Sometimes in life, it's better to obfuscate than to say what you really mean. Now, I don't think obfuscation is a dominant characteristic of my online posting. But there's a time and a place for obfuscation. And there's certainly many instances where it's far better just to be in a state of awareness. Sometimes it's just far better to notice what you're feeling, what's going on in your body. Your muscles tensing, you're getting tired, you're getting exhausted, do you feel unsafe? Right? Do you feel like, oh, I'm in a bad situation and I can't cognitively put words to exactly why I feel unsafe, why this is not good for me, why this is, dangerous for my best interests. And should you admit to those feelings of vulnerability and exhaustion when you can't then present a kick-ass, powerful, cognitively dominating explanation for why you're feeling something? Right? This is a safe space, guys. You can express your feelings even if you don't have a kick-ass, dominating, cognitively overwhelming, philosophically grounded explanation for what you're feeling.
Great to tackle them head on. No offense to Luke. I love Luke. We all love Luke. Okay? This is not offense. This is like me shooting from the hip, trying to explain how I see things. And it's like, there's all this dancing around, and it's like there's 50% of this and half a dozen of this, and we can't really figure out any like serious conclusions. And I'm here and I'm thinking, what is the point in any of this analysis? So I'm wanting to like him to like give me some substance. And
so if you're so inclined, listen to my interview with Stephen J. James on Sunday and tell me, was there any substance there? Was there any value? I thought it was a great 2 hours. It was exhausting. Like, I put my heart, I put my soul, I put my brain, I put the best of my knowledge, I put the best of my values, I put the best of my life experience into that 2-hour live stream with Stephen James. Right? I feel great about it. I think I did great. Like, I believe there was value there. So I don't share Stephen's critique that it was just pablum and fluff and Luke sitting on the fence. There is absolutely a time to sit on the fence. And there are many occasions where you don't want to spell out what you're really thinking. Take Bibi Netanyahu over the past 14 months as a model here. If Bibi Netanyahu had been explicit about his intentions of how he planned to conduct Israel's like 8-front war, he would have fallen out with the United States and lost the support and the ammunition and the military aid that America was giving. And he would have fallen out with his governing coalition. So he would have been tossed out of power. Would Israel have operated more effectively in its interest if Bibi Netanyahu had been upfront, open, honest, came out with a philosophically grounded, cognitively powerful, explicit description of his intentions, and then fallen out with everyone who he needed to maintain relations with, and therefore not be very effective in conducting Israel's 8-front war? No. If Bibi tells the truth, if Bibi had told the truth over the past 14 months about his intentions, he would have been screwed. And there are all sorts of instances in my life, I know, where if I were to tell the truth, I would be screwed. I suspect there are all sorts of instances in your life, if you were to tell the truth, you would be screwed. There is a time and a place for honesty. There's a time and a place for full disclosure. There's a time and a place for obfuscation. Like, Bibi cannot talk about his plans openly and honestly, either with the far-right members of his governing coalition, to his enemies, to the Israeli elites who are overwhelmingly on the left, nor to the Biden administration. He has to lie to be effective. And it seems to me that Bibi's been quite effective, in particular the last 6 months. And he's been quite effective because he hasn't just said the blunt and honest truth. Instead, he has obfuscated, he has lied, he has manipulated, he has been pulling strings, he's been fence sitting. There are many times in life where sitting on the fence is the very best thing that you can do. So I don't recollect my Sunday stream as primarily characterized by fence sitting. I see it as a highly nuanced, detailed, empathic explanation of highly uncomfortable and highly arousing, difficult challenges. But that analysis is coming from a place in large part of ego. That, 40, you're a great guy. You did a great job on Sunday. Don't listen to these critics.
So I know. I asked him a few uncomfortable questions about like, so why, explain how Jews ended up in the alt-right, and I thought I was softballing him.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
And he talked himself into a twist.
He did softball me. Stephen J. James conducted a softball interview, and I exhausted myself. So Ricardo has a lot more emotional honesty than I do. He is often just much more authentic. I feel mannered and stiff compared to Ricardo. He's a much more visceral person, and I may well have talked myself into a twist. I may have, and then go, ooh, I don't like this direction. Let's reverse course.
Or something.
I don't know where it went off the rails, to be honest.
It didn't go off the rails. It was a great interview. It's not Stephen's responsibility to make me happy. And Stephen did a good interview, softball, nothing at all duplicitous or tough about it. To the extent it was exhausting, it was because of my choices. It was entirely on me that I was so tired, and that's not Stephen's responsibility.
Honest. I mean, I wasn't going to accuse Jews of being like responsible for immigration. I'm beyond that. I'm past all that. Yeah. Past all that. Don't care. Okay, that's like alt-right 1.0. Fuck that shit. Yeah. So I think maybe the question where it went off the rails was, I wanted to know, well, if Jews are so smart, well, why haven't they realized then that like the demographic collapse is happening and decided to do something about it? And he's like, I don't know, define Jew or something.
Okay, so let someone tosses a loaded hand grenade onto your lap, and at the same time, someone else tosses you the pin for this hand grenade. Unless you put the pin in the hand grenade, it's going to go off in 5 seconds. And my God, imagine if you found that challenging. Imagine if you displayed some signs of stress. So the simple statement that Stephen J. James just relayed is the social equivalent of tossing a loaded hand grenade to someone with the pin out and someone else tossing you the pin, and you have to put the pin in the hand grenade. So if you don't recognize what Stephen J. James was saying, as if you're commenting publicly on this matter, as someone tossing you a loaded hand grenade without a pin in it, and you have a few seconds to find the pin to put in the hand grenade, then you're likely a marginalized loser. You likely have very few people in your life who care about you, and you're very likely addicted to a path of isolation and self-destruction. Right? If you have something to lose, if you have an honorable position in your community, if you have an upstanding career, if you love people, if you love your family, love your friends, right, you would recognize that you'd just been tossed a loaded grenade, and you had a few seconds to put a pin in that grenade. It was going to explode and it was going to damage you, but it could also damage some rando troubled soul who just came across your live stream and perhaps is listening to a discussion of these issues for the first time. Someone who is just one cue away from saying, F the optics, I'm going in.
Something. I don't know what it was. I don't know what it was.
All right, so if you think it's funny to receive a loaded hand grenade without a pin in it, and that just strikes you as funny, it is funny, but it also requires a certain nihilism, or you have to feel completely deluded that you are just completely safe because you're using a fake picture and a fake name. So a normal person using their real face and their real name in that situation, speaking publicly, where what they say can be clipped and used against them for all eternity, would recognize that as a loaded hand grenade.
No, I know. It's like he forgot everything that happened. Like, it's like,
yes.
Who is that Luke Ford? He's been replaced like Joe Biden. He's a body double.
My God, maybe I've developed increased empathy for the normie perspective. Maybe I have developed an increasing interest in my own well-being. Maybe I've gotten older and come to a clearer understanding of my own vulnerability. Maybe the events of October 7, 2023, where over 1,000 Israelis were slaughtered by Hamas terrorists, maybe they've affected me. I've certainly thought more about Israel. I've had more emotional investment in Israel over the past 14 months than in the rest of my life put together. So when the world around me changes, I change. When some of my commitments change, I change. When some of my connections change, I change. When my life situation changes, I change. When I get more clarity on my vulnerability, I change. When I develop friendships that have become more important to me, I change. When I develop increased clarity about how topics and words will be received by normies or by people all over the socioeconomic, religious, cultural, ethnic spectrum, and I developed increased clarity about the effect of words and topics on a wide variety of people, and therefore I become more attuned and more sensitive and more considerate of what might be the repercussions of what I'm saying, then I hope I would change in these circumstances.
But he, you know, it's interesting because you know what I was thinking about was that when I remember being on Luke Ford's show and the things we would talk about, and I remember saying, like, we're posing the question, you know, would you be willing to trade immigration restriction in the United States?
So, topic in the chat, there's no need to kick yourself out of being associated with dissident right because you cannot avoid thinking of and talking about dissident right talking points. No. So, do I strike you as someone who's just constantly kicking himself? Because that's not how I experience myself. So, when I look back at the past, my general frame is, given who I was at the time, I could not have acted differently, and that I was doing the best I could to meet my needs at that time with the tools that I had at my disposal. Now I have more tools at my disposal. And so I think in a similar situation going forward, I'll make a different choice than I made in the past. Now, for most people, prior to Richard Spencer's Hellgate at the end of 2016, the dissident right connoted merry pranksters and Breitbart type politics. Then Richard Spencer came along with Hellgate and made the alt-right connote Nazism. So what was once considered a bunch of merry pranksters with a Breitbart type politics, right, transformed virtually overnight into a Nazi crowd. So I feel much more at ease with a Breitbart type politics than I do with a Nazi politics. But hey, that's just me.
States. Like, would you be willing to make a coalition with Netanyahu to, like, give them Israel if we could have America, let's say, or like if England could have borders as long as Israel does?
So the only people who speak this way are marginalized losers with nothing at risk, or people who feel completely confident of their anonymity. Right? No one who cares about their family, their job, their business, their standing, like, speaks this way. Right? You immediately flagging yourself to the normie mind as someone who's, you know, in all likelihood, a terrorist or a threat to public safety. Now, that doesn't then invalidate the logic or the intellectual coherence of their points necessarily. Right? You can say things that are logically and coherently strong and also strike people as a terrorist. I don't think his point is logically and philosophically coherent. All right, I think it's incoherent. I just think the words that he's saying are a scream that I'm a marginalized loser lost in a world of anti-Jewish delusion. That's how a normal person would react to that type of comment. So the Jewish question in 19th century Europe was about, are Jews worthy of citizenship in France, in Germany, in in all the different countries in Europe, are they worthy of equal citizenship? That is not an issue today with 95% of people. And if you were to raise it as an issue, you would mark yourself as a freak in the eyes of a normie. If you were to claim that Jews control American politics, you have marked yourself as a freak in the eyes of most people. And you've also marked yourself as deluded. There are areas of American political life where Jews exercise disproportionate influence. There are areas of American political life where seniors exercise disproportionate influence, right? Different groups have different gifts and different levels of influence. I don't notice a lot of white players starting at cornerback in the NFL. I don't notice a lot of white players playing defense or wide receiver or running back in the NFL. So sure seems to me different groups have different interests, but there are ways that you can talk about group gifts that are socially acceptable, and then there are ways that you can talk about them that make the normie think you're a lunatic, marginalized loser, and perhaps a terrorist.
It's like, I'm fine with, well, I felt like, you know, could I, or maybe I felt I could be okay with, like, listen, like, let's just end the hypocrisy. You know, like, the liberal internet.
It's a childish desire for some kind of blanket end of hypocrisy, right? Hypocrisy is the payment that vice pays to virtue, right? Hypocrisy is an essential tool for navigating life, just as obfuscation and lying are also at times essential tools for navigating life. And wanting a world where there's no hypocrisy and no lying is a desire to leave reality.
Nationalist wing can support open, you know, it makes sense that George Soros supports borders on both ends. Mm-hmm. But when Ben Shapiro is basically destroying my country while promoting.
How is Ben Shapiro destroying your country? Right? You sound like a lunatic when you say that. And I'm not someone who puts Ben Shapiro on a pedestal. I think he talks very fast, taking the most conservative positions possible, but he's not someone that I think optimizes for truth. I don't find him particularly impressive. I virtually never seek out his commentary. But the idea that Ben Shapiro is among the 1,000 most influential people destroying America, to me, is complete delusion. Like, how exactly is Ben Shapiro destroying my country?
His own, like, that's a problem. And then October 7th happens, and it's like suddenly that Zio border control coalition like has emerged.
It didn't just emerge on October 7th, right? The most Zionist American Jews are Trump supporters, favor building the wall in the United States and in Israel. Right? Those Jews who favor immigration restriction in Israel overwhelmingly favor building walls and immigration restriction in the United States. Those Jews who are the least interested in Zionism or the most opposed to Zionism in Israel and in the United States, the ones most likely to support what we call open borders. So the truth is the opposite of what Ricardo just said.
And I'm sitting there looking at it like, I don't really like this. This just makes me uncomfortable. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Comment about my Sunday appearance with Stephen J. James. None of these questions were curveballs. Absolutely right. All the questions Stephen asked me on Sunday were softballs. Some of them were softballs in the form of a hand grenade, but he did a lot of deflecting. I guess I frame it differently, but sometimes deflecting is absolutely the right policy. Sometimes you want to sit on a fence. Sometimes you want to lie. Sometimes you want to deflect. There's nothing wrong with deflecting. Sometimes it's better to deflect than to tell the truth. It's better for you. It's better for others. It's better for the community.
It's like racism is kosher now.
Yes.
racism is kosher now. So overt racism is not considered kosher in polite society in the first world, to the extent that I'm aware of that. But implicit racism does govern how most people lead part of their lives in choosing where they live, for example, and choosing where they worship and choosing who they hang out with, right? Yeah, there's probably implicit racism in how most people, some of the time, make their choices. But I'm not aware of explicit, public, brutal expressions of racism being kosher, right? They are kosher in the sense that among very close friends, where you're like-minded, you can say horrible things about outgroups. And this is true for Christians, for Jews, for gays, for Muslims, for atheistic communists, right? All over the social, cultural, religious spectrum. Among close friends, you can say horrible things about outgroups that will hurt your life if you say the same thing publicly.
It is, in a weird way, isn't it? But only in one direction, of course.
Well, of course, and something that Melky talked used to talk about was like,
and Melky blew up his life by talking publicly about extermination of certain groups and would this be good or bad, right? You start talking that way publicly, and there's going to be a huge price to pay, and usually it is a sign of a self-destructive direction in your life. And it's a bad idea in that there are some people who are just one cue away from saying, F the optics, I'm going in.
The choice is between like Christianity and racism. Like, are you like them? Are you like, because it's like in some ways like, I just always felt like I'm anti-white. Like, don't come into my country and disrespect us.
Exactly.
Don't come into my country and act like I'm the problem. Like, you came to my house. You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
And I resent that.
So many Americans would resonate with what Ricardo just said, but most Americans would regard this as a self-destructive thing to say out loud, right? You could say pretty much the same thing in terms of I'm anti-Americanism. I forgot the number of antis, right? So you can phrase things in ways that are likely to blow up your life and infuriate others, or you can say pretty much the same thing, but with a little bit more care and concern for the consequences of what you're saying.
And it's like, I don't want you here if this is how you're going to act. You know what I mean? But I'm not opposed to you in principle just because, like, strictly on, racial bounds, on an individual.
Right. So I think much of America could have empathy with what Ricardo is saying. But if you were appearing on CNN, right, you might make this point in a more socially acceptable manner, which would require a little bit of effort. And guess what? If you expend that effort, you're going to be more tired afterwards. You're going to be a little bit more drained afterwards.
Basis, at least. You know what I mean?
Yes.
But it does seem to play out that, like, yes, if you bring in foreigners in large numbers, you're going to end up with them doing these things. They're not going. They have shown themselves not to be the best housekeepers.
Yeah, we're evolved to be tribal, and we're evolved to have some skepticism about outgroups, but we're not evolved to just automatically hate and loathe outgroups. Right? We're also evolved with some tendencies to be open to the benefits coming from outgroups.
Yes. Okay. So, but like, it is like it is awfully Jewish to be like so focused on ethnicity. And it's
all right. So to publicly say it's awfully Jewish to be so focused on ethnicity, I think many people can understand what you're saying, but it's not an expression that is going to win you friends and influence people. And it's not particularly Jewish to be focused on ethnicity. right? Most Jews marry non-Jews, ergo they're obviously not focused on ethnicity. Most Jews in America marry non-Jews. Most Jews in America are not highly ethnic, right? Jews as a group in the United States are not more ethnic than your average American. But this is an exciting thing to say, right? Just imagine how much more exciting it is to have this magic key that there's this one tiny group who's responsible for most of the evils in the world. That's exciting. It's destructive, bad for you, and it's stupid, but it is exciting.
Be an ethnic determinist.
Yeah.
So it's a very Jewish thing to be an ethnic determinist, right? It's no more a Jewish thing to be an ethnic determinist than it's an Armenian thing or a Chinese thing or a Japanese thing or an Anglo thing. So recognizing the reality that different groups have different gifts doesn't mean that you then become an ethnic determinist, because there's not an essential quality to being an Anglo, to being a Jew, to being a Muslim, to being a homosexual, to being a secular humanist, right? All these identities will express themselves very differently in different situations, right? Jews in Spain, right, developed a different type of community than Middle Eastern Jews versus Jews in England versus Jews in Lithuania in the 19th century. Jews in Babylon 2,500 years ago developed a different Jewish community than those Jews who remained in the land of what's now known as Israel.
What do you think about Luke's latest, well, I don't know if it's his latest thing. He loves to say, look, when you bring up like the demographic crisis that's happening, look, we're on course. Everybody agrees we're on course to end up a minority in our own countries. This is
everybody agrees except those who actually know something about what they're talking about. So as I mentioned, the U.S. Census Bureau works whereby if I note on my census form that I am Asian American because I'm 1/16 Chinese and Caucasian American, the U.S. Census Bureau counts me solely as Asian and not at all as white, right? So the U.S. Census is rigged to de-emphasize the number of white people and to overemphasize the number of non-white people. And so those who believe that it's just inevitable that whites will become a minority in the United States of America simply do not know what they're talking about. They're ignorant people, and usually their ignorance is part of a whole self-destructive package whereby they are focused on a particular narrative about what's going on in the world around them that burns all their bridges to polite society, that removes all incentives to do something productive with your life, that reduces the wonderful complexity of the world out there, that blinds one to all the opportunities for thriving and for contribution, and instead isolates you and leaves you in a state of hoping for some kind of apocalyptic civil war. It's not a productive mindset, let alone not an accurate mindset.
This is the crisis of the West, that the whole dissident right is there for. It's what the whole alt-right was there for. Yes, there's all these other issues, but basically we're all people who have realised we're going to be minorities in our own countries unless something changes. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, people who share a common ignorance and a disdain for knowing what they're talking about, right? These people bond together. So this is a family, right? You can form a family with heroin addicts, and you can form a family with your other marginalized losers who are intent on staying ignorant and who are committed to a self-destructive path in life. There's a family for you out there.
Right. So what about when you put that to Luke, he says it's not necessarily true because if I fill out the census and I put that I'm 1/16 Chinese, they put me down as Chinese. Therefore, we can't trust the census. I'm like, oh.
I know. I mean,
I didn't say you can't trust the census. I simply point out that there are flaws to the census. There's a difference between pointing out flaws in something and stating, oh, outright, you can't trust it, right? Your spouse has told you some lies. And if you're an immature person, you react to that by saying, there's nothing that my spouse says now that I can believe in. My spouse is to her core a liar. But someone who tells you some lies is not in their essence necessarily a liar. They're simply a human being. And human beings are flawed, and human beings use all sorts of strategies to navigate life. And to just dismiss them because they've told you a lie, or just to dismiss U.S. Census Bureau statistics because they are not 100% accurate, is a symptom of a mindset that is just looking to dismiss possibility for growth and good things in life, right? If you're addicted to losing, if you're addicted to being a marginalized loser, if you are addicted to burning all bridges to growth and contribution and happiness and productivity in life, right, then you will adapt this dismissive mindset that if you see a flaw in something, you'll just dismiss it. And on the other hand, if you get a message that meets your psychological needs, then you may very well put that message giver up on a pedestal. So put some other marginalized losers up on a pedestal, and you just dismiss everybody else, and then you just pursue your path to self-annihilation.
Interesting, because I will say this, like, on a personal basis,
Yeah.
I put, like, if given the choice, I go, like, don't answer. Be like, don't know /
Yeah.
don't respond. Because I find the question, I just hate the whole you know, like, the measuring of the races is kind of like a problem. You know, if there was no racial data, how could they prove disparate impact? So,
Yeah.
but, like, I'm not a normal person, right? So to think, like, that's driving a huge shift away from white. But you know, the other thing that does happen is, like, if you have, I mean, another thing, like, I have a Puerto Rican grandmother who's, like, first of all, is like 80% Iberian.
So I would think that a normal person optimizes for truth when I present a very simple scenario that if I were to fill out the US Census form, and because I am 1/16 Chinese, that if I put I'm Asian and I'm Caucasian, but I am treated solely as Asian on the US Census, you'd think someone who is optimizing for truth would be, number one, interested in the veracity of what I just said, and then be interested in the implications of what I just said. So it's possible that I am deluded. It's possible that I'm lying. It's also possible that I'm telling you the truth about how the US Census Bureau works. I guarantee you that Stephen J. James and Ricardo and all the other ones who use that type of rhetoric are ignorant of the nature of how the US Census Bureau works and are ignorant of the implications of how the US Census works and are resolute and committed to staying ignorant. You'd think a normal person who puts a value on truth would ask, is that true? But the veracity of what I said does not come up, to the best of my knowledge, in this discussion between Stephen and Ricardo, because they are not interested in the truth. They're interested in maintaining a narrative that allows them to self-destruct. And so you've got two wounded animals, each living in a cave. And what happens if you reach your hand down into a cave to assist a wounded animal? They bite your hand. So I just gave them a valuable piece of information where if they're interested in truth, they would have inquired, is that true? And then once they realized it was true, they would then inquire about the implications of what I just said. But the truth and the implications of what I just said do not occur to them, and they have absolutely no interest in what is true, and they have no interest in the implications of what is true. They're 100% committed to living in the cave. And someone who just reaches down into the cave and offers them a little bit of sustenance for a more accurate way of understanding reality, if they behave like the wounded animal that they are, and they should not be blamed for behaving like a wounded animal, they will snap and bite your hand. Right? They have zero interest in the truth. They have 100% interest in self-destructing while they wait for an apocalyptic civil war. And they are not to be blamed for that. They didn't choose to live in a cave. They're not actively choosing to self-destruct. They're not actively choosing to have no interest in the truth, right? They, like me, are the product of their genetics, their early imprinting, their circumstances, their situation, and the psychological tools that they have developed to feel important in life. And they each have a narrative. Well, yeah, all sorts of areas of my life suck, but at least I see through the bullshit. I'm bloody 40, right? He's afraid to even admit what's obviously true, right? That's a narrative that makes you feel good. And are you really going to give up feeling good to admit that you didn't know something? Or to admit that, oh, wow, that sounds like an interesting point. Maybe I should examine whether that point is true, and then maybe I should think about the implications. No. Compared to the emotional payoff of believing that you see through the bullshit, right? Why would you leave the comfort of that warm and fuzzy but self-destructive high, right? I'm sure that many people feel fantastic going on heroin. And these guys feel good, right? Sticking to the spiritual heroin of the Great Replacement theory. And they are completely resolute, completely blocked off to any factual challenges to the narrative that sustains them and keeps them warm during cold winters.
In herself, right? So, but I get to put Hispanic when I apply for college.
Yes.
And like, yeah, I did that. Okay.
Yep.
Would anyone think I'm Hispanic? Do I speak like at a Spanish 101 level of Spanish? Okay. Mm-hmm. It is kind of a joke, but it like if this is the game, if I can say you know what I mean? Like if they're white males, well, they're either Jewish or they're gay. You know what I mean? And it's
yes.
So he claims that if you're a white man who lives in a city, you're either Jewish or you're gay. So I would wager that if you're interested in truth, that you'd recognize that the percentage of white dudes living in cities who are either Jewish or gay is probably overall in the United States less than 10%. But that's not exciting. There's no punch to that kind of reality.
And that's the cities now. And but like that tells you all you need to know about where things are headed. You know, like at least in those areas. Now where I live now, you know, it's different. But then again, like I live in like a growing area where people from the blue states are coming. But I mean, dude, Luke changed, man. I mean, it's like he used to.
I have changed, and if you're a normal human being, you change, right? You are a retarded freak if you do not change. I have particularly changed in the way I discuss these issues, because I have a principle of number one, protecting my own interests, and number two, trying to be useful to people rather than a source of destruction. And that means I don't get to be as exciting as I used to be. It means I don't get to be as compelling. I don't get to be as entertaining. I don't get to have shows that filled with drama and spectacle and a train wreck quality. I have to give all that up, right? I have to content myself with 1% of the audience that I used to have, because I now put more of an emphasis on my own well-being and the well-being of anyone who listens to me.
He used this, like, first of all, he posed like as alt-right. There was definitely...
All right, just not accurate. Never posed as alt-right. Always made clear not alt-right. When I wrote about the porn industry, many people in the porn industry were really eager to say, you're one of us, you're one of us. But I wasn't. I wasn't one of us, one of us.
They're going to make you one of them, my dear.
And so some people with, alt-right politics might say, oh, 40, he posed as one of us, but never did. Always made clear that I was reporting and opining on a topic, just like I used to do with the pornography industry, just like I used to do with regard to organized crime, just like I used to do with Jewish life, right? For years, I was called the Matt Drudge of Jewish life. So Professor Mark Shapiro says, Luke Ford reports all of the juicy quotes, has been doing it for years. Orthodox Rabbi Aaron Rakafet Rothkopf said in one of his lectures about me, this guy knows all the gossip, the ins and outs, the Lashon Hara of the Orthodox world, meaning the gossip. He's an expert in all the inner workings of the Orthodox world.
The stage where like everybody thought he was alt-right, right? And then he was like, "Oh no, well I'm super sympathetic, guys," right? And then he was like,
"No, I tried to interview and find out about people in that domain, and yes, expressing some level of empathy for people is much more effective at forming and developing connections and interviews than expressing contempt." And when I was reporting on the industry, did I go around telling people how much I despise them or how much I despise the industry? No. If I'm reporting on a topic, or if I want to learn about a topic or a group, right, I need some level of human connection, and the display and the practice of empathy, sympathy, and respect will be much more effective tool than telling people everything that you're thinking.
Like, well, you know, I don't know. I'm a Jew. You got to understand. Like, I go to synagogue. What do you want me to say? Right? There was that phase, and now it's like, what do you mean?
That phase, that was always a part of anything that I've said publicly. I'm a Jew. I go to synagogue, and most of my friends are Jewish. And what's most important to me is what happens within Orthodox Judaism, within my friends and community in Orthodox Judaism. That's more important to me than any other sector of my life.
Like I took I plugged back in and I've forgotten everything that happened outside the Matrix. It's like, whoa, dude, he like really plugged back in.
Yeah. Hey, by the way, you know for a fact he's going to play this on his show and dissect it.
I know, and he's gonna
minute
do it
by
in,
minute.
Like, here's what he's gonna do. He's gonna like let us talk for like 8 seconds and like stop it in mid sentence and criticize like the first. Like he said like before 12 p.m. on Tuesday.
So when I play things, all right, I put a priority usually on my own thoughts. So if you say a word and I immediately get a thought, I would typically just stop the excerpt right there and I will share my thought. So part of my audience comes to this show because they want to hear what I think. Another part of the audience comes to this show because they enjoy my selection of excerpts from other things that I've listened to. Other people come for the gestalt, the whole experience, the community and everything put together. So yes, if I hear one word and I get a thought, I will stop that word and I will put a priority on my own thoughts. My own biggest critique of my live streaming is that I play way too much material from other people and I don't spend enough time and enough energy developing my own thoughts. So when I am least impressed by my own shows, it's when I feel like I've contributed very little, next to nothing. All I've done is play thoughts from other people, and I haven't had the balls, I haven't had the strength, I haven't had the clarity, I haven't done the work to develop my own point of view, and all I'm doing is playing other people, right? I don't walk away from those live streams feeling good about them. On the other hand, if I'm able to use one word from somebody else and it sends me down a particular track, and if I think it's a possibly useful track that somebody might hear and that they might get some benefit from, then I feel good. And the more I can contribute, the better I feel. So when I have an Alexander Technique client, the more I can contribute to them, the better I feel. Right? The more I say, oh, you should do your own research on the Alexander Technique, and I don't feel like I contributed anything to them, I don't feel great about that. So in general, the more I can contribute to someone's life, to someone's community, to a workplace, to a client, to a podcast, to a relationship, right, the better I feel.
Okay, and it wasn't, it's like, let me finish this sentence. You're not even like letting a thought roll and like.
If you want to hear the thoughts roll, I link to the original material that I play on my shows. So go listen to the original material without interruption. If I were in the audience right now and I heard something that I wanted to hear without interruption, right, I'd just go listen to the original content without interruption.
Address the paragraph. You know what I mean? Can you address the paragraph instead of the sentence?
Yes, in a weird way, that's what I was wanting from. I was like, look, I understand that we have to do this politely. We have to do it like, let's not resort to it. I'm not trying to get you on.
So what's polite in some circles is barbaric in other circles. So the questions that Stephen J. James tossed me were softballs, but some of them were softballs containing hand grenades in many of the social circles that I live in. And so I would hope that I'd put a great priority on my own well-being, much more of a priority on my own well-being than saying things that Stephen and Ricardo would approve of. It's more important to me that I stand on my own 2 feet rather than receive praise from people who are addicted to self-destruction.
On a show like, I know, Norvin, and get you to do racial slurs, Luke, or something. I'm like,
There's a time and a place for racial slurs. Right? There's some contexts where racial slurs are hilarious. And then there are other contexts where it's a really bad idea to be promoting that publicly.
So we have to tiptoe around, but let's get to the...
So there are a lot of things that you want to tiptoe around. Right? Frequently, tiptoeing around is a much better strategy than just grabbing them by the pussy. If you're in a normal marriage for longer than a year and you want to have sex with your wife, just grabbing her by the pussy is not usually going to be a good strategy. You would be much better served tiptoeing around and not telling her what's explicitly on your mind. There are many situations in life where you don't want to just grab, you want to tiptoe around. Time and a place for tiptoeing. Nothing wrong with being light in your loafers.
The meat and potatoes of the argument. And so let's talk about the spirit of the law rather than the letter of the law, basically.
Right, there is a time and a place to talk about the spirit. There's a time and a place where the spirit of the law is more important than the letter of the law. And then there are other times where the letter of the law is more important than the spirit of the law. It's not like there's just, one universal rule where it's always the spirit or always the letter. There are a lot of employers right now who want to lay off employees without paying severance. And so they are looking for ways to dismiss people for cause to minimize the chances of getting sued and not pay out severance. And so if you want to stay employed, you better obey not just the spirit of the laws in your workplace, but also the letter.
I was trying to get from it, but he's like, no, I mean, it felt like obfuscation. And I think what happened was he got, maybe because towards the end I was pointing out that I was feeling frustrated by his obfuscation.
Now, if you are bent on blowing up your life and you feel protected because you are anonymous, it's going to upset you when other people won't join you in your journey to Hades. Like, who are these wankers? Like, why won't they do heroin with me?
Obfuscation. And then he went on his show to basically admit that he was worn out by obfuscating, because that's what he said, wasn't it?
So I am self-interested. I'm not just healthfully self-interested. Some of the times I'm pathologically, egotistically driven. So my understanding of the exhaustion from answering Stephen J. James' softballs is that I wanted to frame things in a way that would be most useful for my own interests and most useful for listeners. That's my framing. But I'm sure there's some element of self-delusion there. Or not.
Yeah, he did say that. It was weird. It's like
he admitted he was having to basically not tell the truth to remain like friends with his friends, and that was
to stay connected with the people who are most important to me, I may at times be economical with the truth. So I'm not aware of promoting lies when I live stream, but I certainly will be economical with the truth at times on my live streams and in real life. Do I want to develop a reputation for being economical with the truth? No. I want to have the reputation of being an honest, forthright, fair dinkum bloke. Do I want to develop the reputation as a nasty gossip? No. But will I get a thrill out of sharing nasty gossip at times? I certainly will.
Exhausting.
Well, and that's interesting. I mean, I guess I'm wrong in that by doing so, he's essentially saying, listen, man, like, what do you want me to say? Like,
yeah.
Which is, it's interesting now, man, because I find it really, and really the main subject I kind of wanted to talk to you, because I know you were
Yes.
a Musk maximalist.
Yes.
And this issue around, everybody from 2018, like Frame Games, Mike Benz is like famous now, right? Mike Benz goes on Joe Rogan, okay? And Nathan Kaufness and these characters are...
So Frame Games is famous because he's very good at what he does in terms of effectiveness as a right-wing activist, and I am broadly aligned with almost everything that Frame Games promotes. Now, if you're analyzing Frame Games on the basis of truth, then he doesn't do so good. But it's probably quite a good strategy out there to be economical with the truth, to promote your own interests and your own political interests, unless you primarily try to optimize for the truth, then it's a bad strategy.
Have grown in their, the Kaufness critique and all these questions around Jewish power are mainstream. There's like no doubt.
So for everyone who talks about the Kaufness critique, my sense is that fewer than 1% of them have read the whole thing with care. And most people who talk about the Kaufness critique and a million other topics feel absolutely no compulsion to do so accurately and truthfully, because they are primarily coming out of a narrative that they have constructed that optimizes for their own feeling of being a hero rather than for the pursuit of truth.
Yeah. Like in 2015, 2016, it was like, there was like Norvin... I mean, there was like Richard Spencer, like that. There was like, all right, man. It was tiny. It was like way outside the Overton window, and now it's like sitting right there yes. on the line. It's like October 7th changed everything, and like everything is about Israel, the Israel lobby, and it's not even.
So Ricardo didn't even vote from his own self-report, which, if you're in a swing state. All right, let's say Ricardo's in a swing state, then to not vote because you think that Donald Trump is too pro-Israel and you're an American nationalist, it strikes me as a poor decision. So Ricardo regards Nick Fuentes as a major truth teller and a hero, and he regards the peak phenomenon of the last 10 years is Kanye West's like anti-Jewish self-destruction. So these are the heroes in the Ricardo worldview. And to me, this is a self-destructive, ineffective hero system.
The Israel lobby is not hiding itself anymore. Like, you see that 60 interview clip from today with the Mossad guy?
No. What's that?
Oh, you got, let's see. If we, yeah. Let's see. Twitter, Mossad, 60 minutes. Let's see. Anti-American elite, right? So it's like, there is like this undermining of the American empire by doing that. And that's why like Iran will fund EMJ or something.
Absolutely.
But
And like this
I do
idea
hear
that,
you.
that
I
America
know what
will
you mean.
collapse. This idea that America's going to collapse, balkanize. I mean, it just sounds retarded to me that America will balkanize. It's not going to happen. This is like Moscow's pipe dream that they want you to.
So I'm thinking about one regular on the show who's every time there's a bit of news that presages some troubles for America, he seizes on it as further evidence that America is going to collapse. So I've become increasingly convinced over the past few years that we don't see the world as it is, we see the world as we are. And if you have chosen an isolated life, right, you're going to choose a frame for looking out at reality whereby you'll essentially only notice those parts of reality that reinforce your worldview. And if you've chosen to create a fairly isolated life, then you'll interpret the news on the basis of, here is further evidence for why my choices in life are right. And I think this is how most of us look at the world. We are looking for confirmation that our choices are the right choices. And this blinds us from reality.
To believe that like America's going to fall apart and start, I don't know, dividing itself up into little chunks of pieces. I mean, is that really going to happen? Or is that Dugin's pipe dream that he wants you to believe in, basically?
You know,
America's so resilient. They have the biggest economy on earth. They are the global superpower. They can kick the shit out of anybody. And when the tough gets going, they could just cancel their debt, and they could even retreat back to the North American continent, and you're isolated. I mean, what couldn't be in a better position.
Yeah. You know, it's interesting because I feel like what you're describing is like something I've, you know, over the last decade, I feel that I've come to realize how I can't trust anything.
Yeah.
At all.
Right. This is the most important sentence said on this show. So Ricardo swallowed the red pill and it poisoned him. So some people swallowed the red pill and they became more effective in life. They became more empathic in life. They developed a more accurate and sophisticated sense of both themselves and other people. But it seems, based on my experience, most people who swallow the red pill become less effective in life. So Ricardo says, I realize I can't trust anything. So Ricardo has arrived at a state of just complete demoralization when it comes to ascertaining truth. Right? He is still suffering the ill effects of being poisoned. So there's no need to have any negative feelings or, you know, any repulsion towards what Ricardo's saying. He's obviously been poisoned, and he's doing the best he can with the tools that he has, and he's in a place where he can't trust anything. So he may not even trust that the world is flat, that evolution is a fairly effective theory at understanding group selection, and he may not even believe that we landed on the moon in 1969, or that Kennedy truly defeated Nixon in the 1960 presidential race, or that Joe Biden truly won the 2020 election over Donald Trump. I can't imagine wanting other people to be this demoralized. Right? What is great about Ricardo is that he is often just so honest. He is just so emotionally raw. He is so visceral, where he tells you exactly what he's thinking and feeling. And to me, this is the most important sentence said on the whole show. I've come to realize I can't trust anything. And that's not a good way to go through life. Right? Let's say you're an alcoholic and you realize that you've trusted many things that you should not trust in, such as alcohol. But as you recover, right, you should learn persons and situations and parts of yourself that you can trust. I don't empathize with this. This is not something that I've consciously experienced. right? I feel my experience is that I feel that I've come to increasing clarity and sophistication, both from my own internal experience, my social experience, and in the world around me. To me, this is incredibly sad. And it doesn't make Ricardo a bad person. It just seems to me evidence that Ricardo's been poisoned. And why did the red pill poison Ricardo? Well, it would have to do with a combination of genetics, early imprinting, and psychological and social incentives that compelled him to take the intellectual equivalent of heroin. And to the extent that Stephen J. James empathizes with, or not empathizes, but shares this point of view, then I think Stephen is so honest himself that he would also admit, yeah, I was poisoned too by the red pill. I don't think Stephen has been as profoundly poisoned by it as Ricardo.
And that, like, you know, Donald Trump, I had so much hope in him, and then
right. So Ricardo had Donald Trump on a pedestal, and now he's thrown him in the gutter. And so this phenomenon of putting people on a pedestal one moment and then throwing them in the gutter the next moment is not a useful way to go through life. No one would choose to do this. I've done this myself through most of my life. I had a psychiatrist who noted that, you know, Luke put some people on the pedestal, and people who he knows well, he puts them in the gutter. Right? People I don't know well, I'll put them on the pedestal, but then they'll say or do one thing, and then I'll throw them in the gutter. Right? This is a highly self-destructive way to go through life, and people never choose this maladaptive path through life, but it's a very painful and ineffective phase, I would hope.
In this election, like, everybody's talking about the deportation as this Homan character. None of it's going to happen, man. You know, like...
Right, so you have an exaggerated faith in someone. They don't live up to your impossible expectations, so then you say there's nothing good that they can do. So my perspective on Donald Trump was always that he would do some of the things that he said, but it may well just be 5% or 10%, but 5 or 10% of the things he said were better than the alternatives. And that's still my perspective today.
Like, literally everything is fake and gay. It's just...
Right, so the perspective that everything is fake and gay is a symptom of poisoning. Right? You would not wish this perspective on anyone that you cared about. Right? This poor bloke has been poisoned, and he is being brutally honest about how he's experiencing life. It's not a good path. Right? Getting poisoned is not a good thing to do.
It is. And I used to wonder, like, I used to think, like, oh, I wonder why my dad, like, never took, like, stronger... My dad didn't take a lot of strong positions on things, like maybe the...
Well, probably because we don't know very much. And for most people, most of the time, it is not an adaptive, sophisticated, and truth-optimizing attitude to have really strong opinions on things, right? The stronger your position on something, the less open you are to truth.
The way a younger man does, like in his idealism. And I've sort of, as I'm coming up on...
So you're hearing a disappointed idealist who is now finding comfort in cynicism. And then I hope he'll keep moving and growing in his path and move past inappropriate maladaptive uses of idealism and cynicism.
140, like, really started to realize, like, how little I don't know. You know what I mean? Like, you just don't know. Like, to say, we said something, you know, Musk is this, Musk is that. Like, you have no idea, like, what is and what isn't real, and, like, what's just a character. You know?
So it was a lot of fun to denigrate Elon Musk and say his taking over Twitter wouldn't mean anything. He's just a con man. But Elon Musk has proved himself a person of tremendous influence and substance and achievement. And that can be painful to recognize, because you may well think, wow, how come I'm not 1/1000th of that? it may be more psychologically comforting to deny substance and achievement to Elon Musk rather than to look at yourself and your own choices and consider, why have I been so ineffective? Perhaps because I've been idealizing and devaluing.
You know, like the Mossad guy said, and like, what's that crap? Like, why is that on TV? You know, is he Mossad? Like, what is this? You know?
And people will be telling you the truth, and you just won't realize it.
This isn't how I experience life. All right, if someone says something to me and it doesn't make sense, and I carefully consider it because there are good, logical, self-interested reasons why I should carefully consider what they're saying, and it still doesn't make sense, the overwhelming likelihood is that they are lying to me, either deliberately or unconsciously. If you know yourself, if you strive to be honest with yourself, you will very quickly realize when other people are lying to you. If you don't realize when other people are lying to you and manipulating you, right? If you're continually getting conned, where you're not trusting people when you should be trusting them, and you're mistrusting them and you should be trusting, and you're trusting when you should not be trusting, it's because you lack the courage and the ability and the character to be honest with yourself. It's a you problem, not a they problem.
So that you don't know what to trust anymore. You don't know who to believe anymore. But even though you have an abundance of information, you can't.
So why does Luke personalize the political all the time? I just find myself doing it. Why exactly I do it is a good question. Is any criticism of Musk stemming from jealousy and feelings of personal inadequacy? I don't think there's anything that I said that would argue for that. Right? There is a great deal of the con man in Musk. He is a buffoon and a fool much of the time. I said to deny that Elon Musk has significance is stupid. Is Elon Musk well deserving of all sorts of criticism? Yes. He has many of the characteristics of the con man and the fool.
Can't work out what's the truth.
Right, and in some way, I feel demoralized. Like,
yeah, well, that is part of the active measure.
Well,
yeah, he feels demoralized. He is poisoned. Ricardo did not choose to be demoralized. Ricardo did not make a choice 8, 9, 10 years ago. I want to go on a path that makes me demoralized and removes from me the ability to distinguish what is true from what is false. Right? He's a sick man, like I am a sick man in many ways that I don't necessarily have clarity on. And we all have our blind spots and we all have our pathologies. And what makes Ricardo great for live streaming is that he is so open and honest at times.
that's what I mean. It's like
whoever it's coming from.
Right, whoever it's coming from, it's like they've kind of like taking me out of it.
So there's no possibility for recovery as long as Ricardo has this perspective that the reason he's demoralized and the reason that he can't distinguish truth from lies is that it's a they problem. It's a Ricardo problem. And until Ricardo realized that he unconsciously, non-deliberatively put himself on a trajectory to get to this poisoned state, right? There's no recovery from it. So when he realizes that this state of demoralization and inability to distinguish what's true is a me problem, not a they problem, then he is open to a more effective path in life. Just like Richard Spencer, similar bloke. He still seems to be very much stuck in my problems are because of them. And when he realizes that most of his problems are because of his own choices, not necessarily deliberatively, consciously chosen, but when he realizes, hey, this is a me problem, not a they problem, then there's the possibility of recovery.
Of it, because I realize like I've been played before. You know what I mean? And it's like
so
let's say you get played. So much easier to blame those who played you. So much more difficult, more challenging, and more painful to recognize your role in getting played. So I came to Los Angeles in March of 1994, and when I lived in Orlando, Florida, I had a girlfriend who used to work at the Ford modeling agency, and she would tell me, you should pursue modeling. And so I went on some modeling auditions. I went on some acting auditions for about 2 years. And I got taken for about $10,000 worth of various scams. And why did I get taken while other people did not get taken in these scams? Because these scams enabled me to have delusions about myself and my place in the world. Right? I was paying to believe in a delusion. And when I recognized that I was paying to be scammed so that I could fortify this delusional sense of myself, I stopped getting scammed.
They've succeeded because you know, not just say.
So Stephen's off base here. He thinks this is a they problem when it's a Ricardo problem.
This because I know you, but you could have been like a really good like guy on the political scene, and you were like, I'm done with this movement. So like they succeeded. They took out a potential.
But it has nothing to do with they. This is 100% Ricardo's stuff. Not deliberatively chosen, but he unconsciously poisoned himself for years on alt-right podcasts, and he's never recovered.
You know, player.
I think so. I mean, yes, I do feel like.
Right, Ricardo very strongly believes that it's a they problem. Other people have effed him, and now at least, even if he is demoralized, even if he can't tell what's true from what's false, well, at least he sees through the bullshit, and he's so invested in this conception of himself that he is stuck in a downward spiral. Doesn't mean that there aren't parts of his life where he's stuck in an upward spiral. Doesn't mean that there aren't all sorts of areas in his life where Ricardo's moving on up and 40's moving on down. I'm just talking about one segment of his life. Right? He may be doing all sorts of great things in his life, and just this one little area, he's stuck.
I think sometimes, man, I'm like, oh, I could stream about something, but I'm like, I don't know what I believe. It's like, I don't know what we ought to do. You know what I mean? Like, like.
There are many benefits to being in this place. Right? It's better not to stream when you're in this place.
I don't know who the bad guys are. I mean, I know there are bad guys. I basically concluded that they're all bad guys.
Yeah.
I mean, I think, and if all of my choices are a bad guy, and I'm too busy raising kids, then fuck. Like all I can do is like make sure my own shit's in order.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
And in a way,
I remember seeing Robert Kraft, who's the owner of the New England Patriots. You know, they get on TV and they talk about hate, and he's like, we need to make sure we stop all the hate against like racial minorities and sexual minorities and women and Jews.
So needlessly hating people isn't usually a good strategy for life and doesn't help you to optimize truth. On the other hand, you know, recognizing that different groups have different interests, different groups have different gifts, that should make you more clear about the world around you.
And it's like, and you still can't say white people. You know what I mean? It's like, so.
Now, you may think reality sucks. You may want to write a ticket against various parts of reality for violating your rules for how the world works. But this is reality, and as long as Ricardo's at war with reality, right, there's no success when you're at war with reality. So you want to talk about white interests, you will be socially ostracized, and people will think you're either socially marginalized loser or a socially marginalized loser who is liable to support or commit acts of terrorism. Even if you are logically and coherently right, that's still how you're going to come across. And you may say, that's wrong. Reality should not be this way. But reality is, reality will always win. And raging against reality is not an effective life strategy.
I think they try. I mean, I don't know where it'll stop or not, but like, you know, when they pass these laws, you know, like
I put this to Luke. I said, look, I'm afraid, because he said to me, look, would you be opposed? I can't believe he posed me this question. He said, would you be opposed, SJJ, to your country being filled with black people who are conservative?
I guarantee you I did not pose this question. So when you find yourself saying, I can't believe someone said this to me, there's a very good possibility that they didn't say this to you. What I said was, there are going to be circumstances and persons where you feel a great deal of affinity and comfort with the based black guy, or with the black guy, I didn't say this, but I could have, who shares your interests, as opposed to someone who's white and who is pissing on everything that you regard as holy. Right? We have multiple identities. If race is your number one identity in all circumstances, in the United States or the United Kingdom or in Europe, that's very likely a maladaptive life strategy. Right? A normal person, they have a professional identity, a religious identity, a geographic and national identity, and in all likelihood some racial consciousness. But to put race as your number one consideration in all circumstances, in all things, is not a useful strategy for life.
And hold all your values. And I was like, oh my God, this question. I was like, actually, yes, I would. Yes, I would, because I saw Black Lives Matter. I saw people turn on a light switch here. And it wasn't even because.
So what percentage of white people supported Black Lives Matter? Right, what percentage of black people supported Black Lives Matter? You've got some extreme terrorist group like Black Lives Matter. They are not the embodiment and the automatic trajectory for all people of color or for all black people, right? They represent relatively tiny number of black people when they are going out as a terrorist organization.
Because of something that happened in this country, and all of a sudden they were like wearing their skin color as a uniform.
Oh yeah, I had the exact.
So there are going to be some circumstances where suddenly your racial identity is important to you, right? You may be suddenly surrounded by hostile members of a different race, and you feel yourself at threat. And in that particular circumstance, right, you're there on Venice Beach, right? In that particular circumstance, your racial identity may be your most important identity. But normally, in the United States, it will not be your most important identity in most situations. Right? Your most important identity may be religious at times, professional at times, geographic at times, national at times, political, cultural. It may depend upon your hobbies, your interests, your hopes and dreams and desires, and simply being aware of the various identities that in various situations will come to the fore, to me is a clarifying and useful understanding. And you're not a bad man in a certain situation. You get an erection, but if you drop your pants in public and wave that thing around, right, that's a bad decision. Right, you're not a bad man when suddenly you feel tremendous hostility from members of outgroups, and your religious or ethnic or racial identity is suddenly your number one identity, and your well-being is at risk, right? That doesn't make you a bad man.
Exact same. Yeah. Big red pill.
And they were like, you are responsible for, hundreds of years of white supremacy, whitey. And I was like, holy fuck, what has just happened? And I projected out in my mind, like 30 years time, if this continues, and that we are a minority in our country, what is like my children?
So the most attention-seeking NGO-funded activists for this or that racial and ethnic and religious group, not necessarily the most normative embodiments of that particular group.
Are they going to come for my children as a majority for the historical crimes of white supremacy? And I'm like, holy fuck.
No, I agree. I remember.
If you're a normal person right? You have a family, and your primary concern is your family. And after that, your next most intense concern is for your friends and community and your profession and your interests. And then politics, racial politics, non-racial politics, for a normal, healthy person, right, should be definitely not in your top 5 list of concerns.
I had a friend who
There's a useful perspective in 12-step that I derided for decades, and that is to admit powerlessness. And my mind changed when I realized that there are circumstances where it is useful to admit powerlessness, even if it's not 100% true, but it's just useful to admit powerlessness and that you have unmanageability in an area of your life, that you do too much of a certain thing or take too much of a certain substance, and admitting powerlessness can then be the beginning of a more effective way of living life. And for people who at one time put too much emphasis on the importance of politics and then became disillusioned, like Ricardo, admitting powerlessness with regard to politics is probably a useful beginning step to calm down and then to begin constructing a different narrative for the wider world. Because between the two extremes of I am powerless over national politics and I am powerful with regard to national politics, the powerless perspective is far closer to the truth.
He was like a Ben Carson type, and then BLM happened. He's got the hat, and he was like,
no, Donald Trump won this latest election because he dramatically increased his vote totals with Latinos and people of color. So if Donald Trump had a Ricardo type mindset, he would have lost, but he would have felt righteous in losing. He would have felt justified in losing. And he could have come out afterwards and given a press conference and said, well, at least I see through the bullshit. I'm a loser, but I see through the bullshit. But Donald Trump decided in this latest election that it was more important to him to win than to comfort himself with false narratives. And for anyone who resonates with Ricardo's point of view, I hope there comes a time in your life where being effective and useful and contributing to the people around you becomes more important to you than feeling strong in your belief that at least you see through the bullshit.
argue about race. Suddenly it was like, oh wow, like if we get divided on racial lines, like it don't matter. Suddenly,
yeah,
the marketplace of ideas doesn't exist. So I hear you, but so I don't know, man. I mean,
how demoralized would you have to get to think that the marketplace for ideas doesn't exist?
Here's the thing, like it would feel really bad to me to like trade a pseudo-racial.
Let's get Kip back onto the show. Kip, what's going on, man?
Hey, buddy, I figured I'd try to bring a little bit of levity today. Is it a
Beautiful.
good day for it?
Excellent.
I saw you there. You're going to have by the end of the day, you're going to have a clenched jaw and a stiff neck. You know what I mean? And let's just take a minute though. Check your mic connection, because I think you just cut out for a few seconds here and there about a dozen times. It's enough to maybe, cost you a listener or two. So check the connections here and let me know that you're good to go. Everything okay?
I appreciate the tip. Let's continue. However, it's something I'll do when the show's not rolling.
Okay. Putting aside, the little narcissistic gnome that was beaming with pride, how did this interview hit you when you first saw it between these two fellas?
I felt like my ego felt stroked, right? I felt as though I'd been indulged. I was like, oh wow, I matter to these two people and they're talking about me. So I had this primitive, primal, oh, this is a stroke for my ego. Then my second thought was, there's no there's no benefit, there's no growth to come from stroking your own ego. Is there anything that is useful to come from this? So I only started listening to this particular conversation about 2 or 3 hours ago.
10-4. So you don't even have a sneak peek to give me an impression of the Doovid get together?
I scanned a transcript of it and I made a timestamp, but I haven't listened to it.
10-4. Well, that'll give you something to do. That'll give you some homework. But yeah, I didn't think it was coming from a place of bad will. Did you?
Oh no, I'm flattered, and I thought that Stephen J. James did nothing but toss me softballs on Sunday. It's just that I became exhausted for any number of reasons, but had nothing to do with Stephen.
Right. You were talking about copes earlier, and I was thinking I had a favorite Luke Ford cope. Can I share it with you?
Please.
The 120 IQ audience. You know what I mean? Because
yes,
I only have anecdotal evidence of one person. You know what I mean? I have my suspicions that Mr. Blatt is probably carrying a little bit extra. You know, if somebody drifts into the stream that's a little bit light in the loafers, I figure like Elliot probably helps out a little bit. And maybe Kemadov, he's got enough autism in him that I think he might help out too. But you know, if it only takes 2 or 3 drifting in the screen into the stream and fuck it, they've knocked us below that magic number. So I'd like to believe it's true. You know what I mean, Luke? But I suspect there could be a bit of a cope there. I could be wrong. Any thoughts on that?
I think that's a good point. What would you guess is the average IQ of my audience? The mean. So divide up the audience minutes listened and arrive at a mean IQ for my audience.
Yes. I don't know, because of the ideas and things that you talk about, it's over 100. So let's say, what do you say, 112? Would you if Nielsen put something out that said, oh, by the way, the Luke Ford audience has a 112 average IQ, what would your inner gnome think about that?
I think probably accurate.
Okay, but it would also be going, you can do better, right? Of course. It would be
perhaps, because there are benefits to boiling down what you're saying so that it is of benefit for those with an IQ below 120.
I did listen to part of that Stephen J. James talk with Doovid, and I came away with that thinking that we should rap with Doovid more. He's on one level, he's so Jewy, you know, to somebody like me who's from the South that don't see a lot of people quite like Doovid. He's so Jewy. I feel like I can smell the pyramid brick dust coming off his beard or something. You know what I mean? Because he's got that quintessential Jewiness, 10 out of 10. But on the other hand, he's got an autistic honesty about him that's so damn refreshing that we're 99% of the people that Luke Ford talks to, they can't come off of it. You know, your philosopher friend, he's got to maintain relationships inside academia or friendships or whatever. I don't think he can come off of it in a way that Doovid is willing to really talk the unvarnished truth. You get what I'm saying, Luke Ford?
Doovid is extraordinary at times, and then other times he just drones and recapitulates readily available information that's found elsewhere. So I try to be encouraging of the best of him and try to minimize the less stimulating part.
I came the second half of him and Stephen J. James discussion. I came away with a little bit frustrated because Doovid kept trying to give what you and I might call cultural mileposts of why that Jews might be for multiculti, and I don't think, you know, like Stephen J. James, I guess he's younger. He probably doesn't realize that, say, Trump was the first guy to let Jews into the clubs down there in Palm Beach County. You get what I'm saying, Luke? it was closed off to Jews before that. You get what I'm saying?
I didn't know if it was closed off. I mean, Jews have had pretty much open access to the corridors of power, certainly since the 1970s, and they had
Right.
considerable access prior to that.
Well, what one of the hangups that they kept running into is Stephen J. James wasn't aware of how they had been excluded, from the clubs, be it a golf club or a gentleman's club or whatever, that they had been excluded from a lot of things. Earlier than that, they were excluded from universities, but I think those exclusions had ended before that. But they were I think Stephen was having a hard time wondering what was in it for the Jews. Why would they think this way of being now is better than the way of being before? But of course, none of us were around during those neighborhoods, where there was some neighborhoods they wanted to go into back in the 50s and 60s, and they just weren't allowed. We got something to speak on about that?
Yeah, the stronger your in-group identity, the more you're going to likely embrace victimhood. And so those Jews who still identify as Jews, when there's a wonderful non-Jewish America world that they could embrace and make a stronger form of their identity rather than Jewish identity, but those Jews who remain identifyingly Jewish, in part, that's because they have a commitment to a victimhood narrative. And this is not a criticism of Jews. This is, to me, a fact of all in-group identities. You cannot have a strong Christian narrative without having a Christian victimhood narrative. You can't have a strong Black identity without having a strong Black victimhood identity. You can't have a strong gay identity without having a strong victimhood identity. You can't have a strong nationalist identity without having a strong victimhood identity. It's virtually impossible for a large group of people not to have equally intense sense of aggrievement and victimization and resentment that correlates with their degree of intensity of in-group identity.
For some reason in my mind, I thought Doovid was from Detroit, but I think he said New York.
He lives in Detroit. He's also spent time in New York. Okay.
But I think maybe another thing that I identify with Doovid, although on his Jewishness side, he's on the farthest end of the spectrum for me that you can imagine, but he's lived in minority white areas. You know what I mean? So he and I have that in common. What I can't understand is, I don't know, when I was 19, 20, 21, it used to piss me off when I would hear, you remember when we had to make our own answering machine recordings, Luke Ford?
Yes.
I would make my answering machine recordings, and it would be, I would listen back to it, and I'd be like, who's this black guy? Who is this black guy giving out my, it took things like that to make me realize what kind of cultural stuff I had picked up from being thrown into those inner city schools. And Doovid, like I say, he's still got pyramid brick dust on him. None of that inner city stuff has ever affected him. What do you think? What do you think might explain some of that, some of the way I was affected, but Doovid was not affected?
That's interesting. I have a point that's to the side of that, and that is adopting Black culture or a Black accent is probably appropriate and useful in some circumstances, and less appropriate, less useful in other circumstances. So I know a lot of snooty intellectuals mock Hillary Clinton, Barack Obama, and other politicians for adapting their speech and their accent to the group that they're talking to, but there are often very good reasons for code switching. And so I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with code switching and adapting different cultures and accents at times. And not everyone's going to be equally adept at code switching. And that's the way it is.
Yeah, put yourself in my shoes, man. Imagine how surreal it is if you're on a football team. Now, this went on for 2 years in a row, where all your teammates, they're all Black. All the coaches are Black. All the cheerleaders are Black. Everybody in the stands except for your mama is Black. I mean, can you imagine how surreal that would be, Luke Ford?
Yes.
So I don't know. And I was just gonna say one of the takeaways I had from listening to those guys talking was that you were sort of like an incubator space for a group of thinkers, you know, some of them who eventually went on to become well known. And apparently it hit a flashpoint and ended. Uh, can you tell me what ideas kept percolating up, both good and bad? I'm sure you kept seeing themes developing.
Right. So I, as an entrepreneur and someone who wanted to make a living and also desperately needed to get attention to try to find cures for what ailed me for much of my public online life, I've tried to maximize my audience by trying to find niches that were underreported on. And so the value-free understanding that different groups have different gifts was incredibly useful to people, recognizing that there are ethnic components to various industries and that different groups experience life differently, that these two insights were incredibly useful to some people and became a springboard. Some people used it as a springboard to self-destruct. Other people used it as a springboard to go in an antisocial direction. And I'd like to think that some people used these concepts in a useful direction.
My God, somewhere in there, you gave me the answer. I mean, it was there, I guess, but I think I was looking for specific ideas. Was there not 3 or 4 specific ideas that you would see the I don't know, the meter of people, you know, going up and the comment levels going up? There was something they were hungry for. There had to be some 3 or 4 ideas. From what you described to me, Luke, I was sitting around thinking about a bunch of health and wellness fucking multi-level schemers up in Utah, up in the Beehive State, sitting around having a teleconference. Nothing you told me sounded inspiring at all. Come on, fire back at me now.
Okay, so the downside with telling you something visceral and exciting is that it doesn't necessarily correlate with my own best interests.
Okay.
So, so that's why I'm giving it to you in a very hygienic fashion.
Right.
Because I feel abashed, for example, that I gave, who's that dissident Roman Catholic thinker, the red pill. But anyway, I wrote about the role of Jews in the pornography industry, and it sent E. Michael Jones into the Jewish question. And then he's, you know, written a lot of books about the Jewish question ever since. And I was the spark for that direction. And so I'm a little bit abashed about that and don't want to necessarily promote it and scream it to the world.
Right. I notice, I don't know much about E. Michael Jones, but anytime there's a gray area, he always leans in favor of, is it the Catholics that he always leans in favor of?
Yes, traditional Catholics.
And it would, to me, is the word stilt or tilt his worldview, you know? It can't help.
That is his worldview, that traditional Catholicism is the fullest expression of God's will for humanity.
I mean, but seems like a guy like that is so prickly. God dang, Luke, who could do it right? Which Catholic mass could do it right for an E. Michael Jones? He would find something to gripe about, would he not?
Right. So he's probably not super high in agreeableness. And so that's the challenge when you're doing a podcast. Anyone in any life situation can come on something that you've written, and it can then spark them. So I wrote, I think, fair, nuanced essays about Jews in the pornography industry, and E. Michael Jones was sparked, and it completely changed the trajectory of his life. And that's not necessarily the greatest thing for E. Michael Jones and the world. And I don't take more than 1% responsibility for that, if I even take 1%. But it is the fact that I sparked E. Michael Jones' interest in the Jewish question. And that's precisely why so many Jews told me that I should never write about the role of Jews in the pornography industry, because someone might come upon it and then they might misuse it to hurt Jews.
Right. Oh, the same type shit I imagine gets levied at Doooovid, right? The same
Yes.
type of mudslinging. And I imagine it rolls right off of Doooovid. He don't give a shit. Just autistic enough to not give a shit, does he?
No, it doesn't completely roll off him, but
It doesn't?
no, it at times I sense that it has hit home, but how much so, don't know.
I guess where I was going with this is, seems like to me, YouTube was very Gestapo-like, but it sounds like they've loosened up here, there, and everywhere. So
Yes, I think that's pretty accurate in the last 2 years.
is there some way to reconvene these debates, or have you just, were they so toxic that you just cleansed yourself from the whole situation, never to return? Give me the.
They're not necessarily toxic, but they do not seem to be aligned with my own best interests, and it would depend on the quality of them. So some of them I would stand behind and feel proud of to this day. Others I would not like to recapitulate at this time. So before the alt-right started murdering people, right, it was a prankster movement, and it was much more socially acceptable. It was basically associated with a Breitbart type outlook on the world. But then when it starts murdering people, then you have to change, if you're a normal person with something to lose, how you interact and talk about and think about and engage with that sector. And
Yeah.
in the aftermath of synagogue shootings and in the aftermath of October 7, my protective in-group adopted Jewish identity is more sensitive to the smaller possibility that something may be said that could spark some lunatic in a destructive direction. That doesn't mean that I preclude all of these intense discussions, but I am more careful with regard to them.
Yes, sir. Okay, let me ask this a different way. Let me put it a different way. Did the conversation always go back to the same old thing, or did they have conversations? Did they have interesting, thoughtful, provoking conversations about stuff other than the JQ? You get what I'm saying?
Yeah,
'Cause it
I think
almost
there are a lot
sounds
of
like-
great. I think there are a lot of great conversations, and there was a lot of honesty. But the problem was that the people who were particularly honest damaged their life, and so there are a lot of honest things that most people should not say publicly. And
Right.
so
And
it
so
made
here
for
you-
compelling, entertaining, and spectacular live streams, but it came at the cost of their well-being. And even if I only want to take 1% responsibility for somebody self-destructing on one of my streams, it's more pain, internal pain, that I feel than I want to feel.
Yes, sir. Is there anything that you've been bowling before, right? You know what
Yes.
I'm talking about. Okay. Is there anything Luke Ford can do to work as like those bumpers that they'd put out for the little kids to keep them from falling into these gutters that you're saying they kept? Because you're saying they kept falling in the gutter 90-something% of the times, what you're saying, right? And
So
and
there is a limited amount that you can do, which is why I only take 1% responsibility for how people choose to self-destruct from something reasonable and responsible that I say. So I feel compelled to try to do the 1% that I can do. But life and human beings are way too wild to effectively create gutters with a podcast.
okay. So you feel like indeed YouTube has loosened up to enough to reconvene the debates, but you really hadn't gotten comfortable enough with the idea yet to draw out where the lines are. And
I know where the lines are, but the type of people who can engage in a reasonable and responsible discussion on these issues, 99.999% of the time, it is against their self-interest to do so. And of those who want to engage in an open and honest conversation on these issues, the odds that they are self-destructive are about 99.999%. So it is a rare person who can engage in these uncomfortable hot button topics in a reasonable and responsible way that minimizes the chances that it's going to destroy their life and the life of someone in the audience.
When you were talking about taking 1% responsibility, you know what kept flashing in my mind? That black and white ad with all those asshole actors talking about how they take responsibility. It kept flashing in my mind every time you said the word responsibility. That's how propaganda works, my friend. Well, let me ask it in a different way. Of course, it sounds like you haven't heard much of the Doooovid conversation, and just from based on when you check in with the old gang, kind of like you did in the past 24 hours, what would the old gang want from Luke Ford in 2025 if they could have their druthers? Is that a fair question?
The same thing that most people want most of the time, and that is that people don't change. So people would prefer that I go back to 2018, Luke, because that's more comfortable and exciting and fun for them.
Mm-hmm. Well, we at least... Because I'll tell you what, I do dig the idea of having some, I don't know what you call it, witty badinage for some 125 plus IQ stimulation. You and I, we can agree that Mr. Beast is not providing that content. You agree with me there, Luke
Yes, Ford? And I do welcome it, and I welcome you on my show because you have constructed a life where there is fairly minimal chance that the things that you say on this show are going to significantly hurt you. So I respect you, I respect the quality of your strength, and I respect how the things that you are saying publicly are not heading in the opposite direction from your own best interests. And if I could find more people like that, I would welcome them on the show.
You know, when you and I are talking, we're back and forth. There's a little, when it's just you and me, I feel the urge to like spit words out of my mouth, and sometimes as a consequence of that, I come across looking like an idiot. You know what I mean? But if it's you and Colin and Elliot, and we've got some kind of subject matter or whatever, and I'm just getting to like chip in every so often, that's a different thing. You have economy of words. Sometimes you can, I don't know, maybe it brings out the profundity because you don't feel like you're having to fill up dead air. You know what I mean?
Yeah, you're not having to carry it. So when it's just you and me, you are doing most of the work. You are carrying this live stream usually when it's just you and me, and everybody we talk to, and in every situation we encounter, we change, right? You are a different person when you're talking to Colin, if you were to talk to Colin, than when you're just talking to me. You're a different person talking to Elliot. When Elliot enters our conversation, you will change, and that's the nature of reality, is that we are different people with each person and each situation and each community that we encounter. I feel like a completely different man in Yosemite than I do in LA. I feel like a completely different man in Santa Rosa, in Sacramento, in Oregon, in Australia, in London, in Paris. I'm a different person in each place.
For the record, you dirty dog, you wouldn't let me talk to Mr. Colin Liddell, so I wasn't able to give my domo arigato, Colin Liddell. So
yeah, and there would be times and circumstances where I would welcome you and I would bring you in, but I think I did a great hour with Colin. So that particular hour, I liked what was going on, and I wanted to protect that. So I move people in and out depending on the situation.
As you can tell, I don't know. I like the locker room ribbing, jokes, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
I also, you can tell, I like cultural criticism and human nature, philosophy, religion, that kind of stuff. But I also think what's missing from the discussion ever since, say, Patrice died, is that friendly poking at each other. And I was just gonna ask you, is that possible? Do smarter people, do they have a softer side where you can give them a your mama joke and they can fire one back at you? I know it'd be bad form to give you a your mama joke, but in general, you know what I'm saying? Is that
Yeah, it
bad
depends
form?
on the individual. I don't think that type of banter would work with Colin.
Oh, you don't? Okay.
I'm pretty
Okay.
sure it would not.
You know, some people can't, they don't have enough good humor, you know, for that kind of banter or whatever. But just in general, I think it's missing from the discussion. Before I go, I was going to tell you the Nielsen ratings. They sent a letter saying that they didn't have anybody in my area. Well, that's not surprised me because almost nobody lives in my area. But they had put actual money, an actual dollar bill in the envelope just to get me to open that son of a gun. And I opened it just to see if it was a real dollar. Does that make me a sucker? What am I to say about that? That they got to me?
I think most people would, if they had good reason to believe that this was a dollar, most people would spend the 10 seconds opening an envelope to retrieve the dollar. It's a very common mail order tactic, and most people are happy to exchange a little bit of effort and 10 seconds of their time for a dollar.
Those bastards, they got me. And I'm telling you, my armor is up against it. But they made that window so friggin' big, Luke Ford, that I was like, yeah, I'm just...
Was it a real dollar?
It was a real dollar. It said, please accept this real dollar as as you know, appreciation for your time. You know, we'd like somebody in your area or whatever. And I thought they went to the printer with those big ass envelopes to have them big ass windows in there and put the dollar in each one of them. And I said, man, by the time they put postage on this, they've got at least $2, you know, probably close to $2 a head just on the ad. And, but it got me because the last 100 that came through the mail, I threw them away. So I'm thinking, did they invest too much, or doggone it, they invested just enough to get me to open the thing? So I'm going to be having
if it's a sustained tactic, it's probably because it's effective. So personal injury law firms will typically spend between $1,000 to $3,000 per client that they sign up. And often they'll sign up the first client at no profit, just so that they can build a relationship with the client. So spending $1 to get someone to open an envelope is probably a good strategy. Don't see a problem with it in either direction. And it's a good way to understand life. So over the past few years, I have given away thousands of dollars for people who have given me assistance, and in circumstances in which 99% of people would not give any money. So I remember I repeatedly helped out some guy who had millions and millions of dollars, and he never gave me anything for it. And it just burned me. And it just made me say, I will never behave like this. So all sorts of instances where someone has given me assistance where normally they would not be financially compensated for doing it, I have spent thousands of dollars to thank them.
Right. You know, I don't know. You might have been able to sense this because we talked for damn 5 or 6 months now. But I sort of feel guilty because, you know, I haven't had to work for the past, say, 17 years. And I feel guilty about that. And on one hand, I feel like other people can't escape that because of their own attachments that they can't escape. But part of it is the fact that, you know, I also feel like, Luke, maybe in the Jewish faith, maybe you get 5 or 10 opportunities in a life to set yourself up. But a lot of times in a normal man's lifetime, let's say a Gentile man's lifetime, he might only get 1 or 2 chances to set himself up. And so sometimes I think people will, the first time they see that, they'll think, oh, that'll be there forever. And then they turn around and it never comes again or whatever. So on one hand, I do feel guilty about the fact that I'm don't have to go out there and, like, you know, work every day. But on the other hand, you could tell I try to keep a hard edge, like I tell you, by living on $1,000 a month. And a lot of people couldn't do that. So where I'm going with this is I've got a dilemma for the last couple of years because the IRS, if you don't make enough money, they send you the letter saying, hey, you qualify for a $10 a month insurance coverage. And, you know, Luke Ford's been beating me up about getting this insurance coverage. But it feels like free government cheese, Luke. You know what I mean? It feels like free government cheese because all I'm doing is putting in enough money to earn enough interest to stay just below that Mendoza line so I don't get stuck with a tax bill every year. You see what I'm saying, Luke?
Yes, yes.
So,
And there are good reasons for why you should accept that government cheese, and there are good reasons why you should not. And not sure I have a strong opinion each direction, though my strong opinion is one you already know, and that is that
yeah,
you should be working 40 hours a week for your sake
yeah,
and for the world.
yeah. It's, I don't know that I agree with that.
I know you
mean,
don't, but
do you think was it the Greeks or the Romans who sat around talking about it and realized that about 98% of the people that was around them were all slaves? You know, I think in those civilizations they were able to somehow get a comfort level with it. And it's not that I feel everybody else is a slave or whatever, but on one level I do feel like I'm getting over. But on the other level, I designed that. I was told the rules from the age of 18, and I just built my life to those specific rules. But anyway,
wait, I got a point to make. This is how I
okay.
see. This is how I understand you. I understand you and everybody else as then encountering reality with a prism that is looking for points, for arguments that support the choices that you've made. So you look at the world through a prism that most everything is bullshit, and that you made the right decision to isolate and to step away from working a job. And so everything you see, from interest rates to banking regulation to unrest in the Sudan to the construction of a frigate in San Diego and some welding that wasn't done appropriately, you see everything in the news and everything in the wider world through a sonar that is looking for something to beep and support the decisions that you've made.
I guess. I mean, I see. I see that a lot of things are like telegraphed. You know, telegraph. We're going to do something. We're going to put out the propaganda to press agents X, Y, and Z. And by God, we're going to do it, and we're going to justify it, and it's just going to happen. And, you know, so yeah, the Fed, before they raise, if you notice, before the Fed raises the rates, by God, they telegraph it for about 45 days leading up to the time they raise it, because the psychology is the most important thing of it all. The psychology, otherwise people start acting crazy and taking all their money out of the bank and start thinking that everything's being irrational. So everything's like telegraphed, just like you had somebody on and they likened it to it was Colin, likened it to like a boat at sea. You know, it's so big, it's having to telegraph its moves for like miles ahead just to get turned 180 degrees. You get where I'm going, Luke Ford?
Yeah, so you see through the bullshit, but everyone else, would you agree that pretty much everyone else, they're not seeing reality, that they are just simply configured to look for and distort reality to provide themselves comfort that their own choices were good ones?
Yeah, I see. That's a thing particularly that smart people have to watch out for, because they're just smart enough to rationalize everything into the way they want it. You get what I'm saying?
Yeah, I mean, luckily you see through the bullshit, but everyone else, man.
Not all of it. I tell you, it's only 86%. 14% of it is actual stuff. That's why you actually got to take it in and sift through it. But I don't know, Luke. I just in closing, think positive and succeed today. And let's get I'd love to see you comfortable with the idea of getting an open dialogue with 3 or 4 people, you know, where we could sit around and, you know, I could be the comic relief. And I'm also
I would love it. I would love more people like you that I wouldn't have to worry are self-destructing on my stream. Like, I don't worry about you. I don't lose sleep. I don't feel bad. Like, if you say something that damages your life, I think the odds of that occurring are significantly so low that having you on my show doesn't make me feel bad. I need other people that I equally respect as much as I respect you.
10-4 on that. We'll get to vetting, my friend, and I'll let you get back to your show.
Blessings.
See you, bro. Bye.
See you, bro. Good to talk to you. Kip. Valued addition to this show. He can grow on you, bro. Right. This is Stephen J. James talking to Brundlefly, aka Ricardo.
Well, like, okay, like you got to deport all the foreigners, but you're not allowed to have like Christmas anymore. We're doing like, you know, like literal like Judea. We're gonna all convert to Judeo-Christian, like secular Judeo-Christianity. Like, do you want to be a Judeo-Christian? Because I feel like there's something like that. I don't know. Do you know what I mean? Like this, quote, Western secular Judeo-Christianity.
I am with you. As somebody who's had my own crisis of faith and struggles to believe in anything, so I'm basically a cringe atheist. I am with you, though, that I think America... Look, America, its conservative values are only left within Christians. What other demographic is it? None. I look at Americans like in this... I don't know if it's across the whole country, but I watch like this channel. There's this family who live in Texas, and yes, they go to this like megalopolis church or whatever, and it's like singing praise Jesus or whatever. But I think at least you have like values, and you want to bring up your children in like the old conservative tradition, and that want is gone from any other demographic. And so if you want to be conservative in America, it's only residing with the Christians.
No, I know, and there are Republicans of other races, but it's because they're like successful small business owners. You know what I mean? Like it's like the Indian guy with a couple of gas stations, and he's like, man, I don't want to pay taxes. It's not like there's not a. The fact is like the industriousness of our societies and the cohesion and the fact that like everybody shows up to work on time is because of the social issues, not the economic issues. The tax rates don't affect what time people show up to work. They're like cultural/genetic program.
My God, the poor guy has been so poisoned, right? The primary most important issues are simply not the most important issues. It's a world of delusion. No wonder he's demoralized and can't figure out what's true and what's false. And Stephen J. James and both Ricardo mentioned that they struggle to believe in anything. That is not a useful way to go through life. Usually you will be more effective and you will feel stronger and you will be more connected with other people who matter to you if you have some commitments that transcend your own primitive satisfactions.
Programming religious values do. So I think like there's a devil's bargain. This is why I didn't vote, man. I didn't vote for Trump. I mean, after how he played January 6th.
Oh, and his problem with January 6th is that Donald Trump was not sufficiently supportive of those who ransacked the Capitol, right? That's his objection there, right? So it's a sad trajectory from idealizing Donald Trump and having a dramatic overestimation of what he'd be able to accomplish to this current state of utter demoralization and complete inability to distinguish what's right from wrong, and an inability to reconcile with reality that our choices are rarely between great and terrible, but between something that's a little worse or a little better than nothing.
And
you couldn't ever forgive him.
I can't ever forgive him. Well, it like proved to me.
And this attitude, I can never forgive X, particularly for some political position with regard to January 6th, that Donald Trump, his problem here is Donald Trump was not sufficiently supportive of those who ransacked the Capitol. And because he was not sufficiently supportive of those who ransacked the Capitol, therefore he can never forgive him. Right? That is such a mind-bending level of dysfunction that, my God, what a painful and self-destructive and antisocial way to go through life, but it is the product of alt-right poisoning.
He was full of shit. Because
Donald Trump is full of it, and I'm full of it, and Ricardo's full of it, and Stephen J. James is full of it, and your local Orthodox rabbi at times, and in some circumstances, full of it, right? Nobody is immune from being full of it.
because what you just told us justifies going down there. Why aren't you?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, how many people are we responsible for killing? Because we were cold, because we weren't responsive, because we made one choice, and as a result of that choice, there was a cascade of choices that ended up in somebody's premature death. Right? Even the best of doctors kill like at least 10 people in a lifetime through medical error. How many people have we immiserated by our choices? Right? No one is immune from careless, thoughtless choices that destroy other people. What you can do is, number one, open your mind up to the possibility that you've made some careless choices that have devastated other people. Come to terms with the reality that in all likelihood you have done that. Then become open to seeing when you've done that, in what circumstances, what part of yourself you're trying to protect. And then accept that you're a flawed human being like everybody else, and that you could benefit from growth, and there's no reason to hate and loathe yourself for your careless choices made when you did not have sufficient understanding.
You down there? Why are you just walking away the moment everybody?
But if you don't recognize how you are deliberately at times making choices to hurt your spouse, then that part of reality is just going to elude you, right? It's called normal marital sadism, right? We are constantly making choices to deliberately hurt the people who are most important to us. And if you can't face that raw fact, right, you're not going to be able to grow and reduce the amount of time you do that, and reduce the intensity of that damage.
They got in trouble for your ass. What are you doing? And now you're back, and now you're going to build a wall again? Fuck, dude. I mean, listen, if he comes in here in like the first quarter of...
Right, there's no one who will be immune from Ricardo's trajectory of, first of all, putting you on a pedestal for unnecessary reasons, and then throwing you in the gutter for unnecessary reasons. And you don't blame the poisoned man who involuntarily took poison.
2025 is spent like rounding people up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It'll be interesting. You know, but I doubt it. I'm jaded.
Yeah, that's a tough place to be. By the way, thank you for the super chat, Rabbi Judas. Your biggest fan in chat. Literally.
Literal super fan, dude. He bought the hat, man. He's got the I Heart Jews hat.
Yes, he has. Yeah. Oh my god. He wears it with pride as well. What a guy. Yeah. Look, we're getting close to an hour.
Yeah.
So I'd remembered what it was that I'd said to Luke, and it was that, look, Jews have this amazing position in society in America. They're like at the top of the totem pole. They're basically worshipped by, whites in America. And
right, I don't think Jews are worshipped by whites in America. When you say Jews are at the top of the totem pole, that's an incendiary way of noting that some Jews have earned an enormous amount of success in America. Right, a quarter of Jews are poor.
Why would they throw all this away, rather than just team up with white people to
Because the only people who talk this way are socially marginalized losers who either adjacent to terrorism or supportive of terrorism. That's why.
Save the demographics. I mean, just explain it to me, Luke.
Steve Saylor deals with this in a more sophisticated fashion. He notes that support for Israel and positive feelings towards Jews is much stronger among white Christian Americans rather than non-white, non-Christian Americans. Right? That's a more sophisticated way of describing reality.
Like I'm a child or something. And
I think it's gonna happen, man. I say, listen. I guess maybe I just said they won't do deportations. I don't know. We'll see. Like, I guess if they are going to team up and do that, maybe they're for real. You know, but
when he says deportations, what if he just means all the pro-Palestinians?
Yeah, that's actually what's like. It's funny you say that because I was thinking about that too. Was that
So, what do you think the chances are that the Trump administration only deports pro-Palestinians? Right, only one stuck in a fevered dream of perfidious Jews would believe that.
Yeah, it's like, look at all the Muslims we're getting rid of. And I mean, listen, that's fine too, because honestly, it's like Hispanics are at least Christians. You know what I mean? They're Catholics, and they're kind of like Latin American Catholics, but they are not this.
Right. So people like Ricardo put this great emphasis on being Christians. Right. How much do you think that he sacrifices for his Christianity? Right. I'm not aware of anything that he said publicly, and I'm only dealing with Ricardo, the public character, not the private individual behind this public character. Right? You never hear any inkling in any public conversation he's conducted, to the best of my knowledge, where he reveals how much he sacrifices on behalf of his Christianity. And if he's not sacrificing on behalf of his Christianity, then he is very lightly invested in Christianity. So he's promoting Christianity, but from what I hear of this public personality, right, it is Christianity as a tactic. Right? There's zero sense of any real Christian experience emanating from Ricardo or Nick Fuentes.
The same thing as Muslims. Muslims are super foreign imperialists. I mean, the Crusades, man. I don't know how anybody forgets the Crusades. It's like, why would we turn on our ancestors like that? Everything that,
Yeah, Colin Liddell says, with Luz as you discuss Jews. No, I was discussing Jews with Luke because he's Jewish. I mean, come on. There is a reaction. There is a contrarian instinct to like go all the other way and like defend. Hey, look, this is what I want to say to you right at the end. What do you think? Do you think that the dissident right has any use left in it? Because I mean, what I was putting to Luke was that if there was any use in the old alt-right, in the dissident right, it was that it allowed us to actually, use his phrase, cut through that bullshit and actually just like decide what the problems are. And now to come like 180 like he is today, dancing around on the fence, tiptoeing around all the issues, is basically fucking useless. What is the use in that analysis if it means...
Right, am I really useless? Have I really changed 180 degrees? Seems like a tad bit of an overstatement there, Stephen.
Are you considering Luke dissident right? Is that what you mean? He's not. No, he's not. But I'm saying, if you're saying the dancing around is indicative of what the dissident right is, I think it's like, for instance, like I know you don't love. I mean, there's an element of academic agent's coverage.
Academic agent is useless, right? The more time you spend with his production, right, the more cloudy your understanding of reality is. So the more demoralized and confused you'll become.
Of the UK that I think that I completely defer to you as to like what's real and what's not and what's bullshit. Okay.
Yeah.
So I don't know, but I think that sometimes when he talks in code, he can talk in code to the initiated. Like, I don't know, the dissident right to me feels like.
Yeah. And that code is Nazi code, right? That is the foundation of academic agents' worldview.
It's not there's no entry point anymore. It's like you had to be there a while ago.
Yeah, you did.
You did have to be there a while ago, and like that's okay because like we're all sort of like hitting middle age and like gaining power in our lives, and I think that's why I think you start to see like these ideas take place, and these conversations like do still need to take place. I guess the question is like, where is the forefront of right wing culture? And dude, you know what it is, man? Like I was, the term Sigma.
And for Ricardo, the forefront of right-wing culture is Kanye's mentally ill, anti-Jewish phase and Nick Fuentes.
By Box Day's term. Okay. Yep. I consider that to be like right-wing bro culture. Like that's bro internet culture. And I listen to these kids. My son's about to go to middle school, and I see the middle schoolers and the high schoolers talk in their new slang. Everything is Sigma. Sigma is good. And they're like, bro, they're in our Twitter. They read the same Twitter. And so, like, I don't know who their guys are. I mean, maybe Nick Fuentes is like this. It's the Groypers, man. I mean, that's where the energy is. And if he's part of the dissident right, then I guess it does have value. But, I mean, he's somewhat different. I don't know. I think listen, I'm not gonna like sit up here and be like, oh, I love Nick Fuentes, and let's just we're neutral observers on the show. But I felt for a long time that the dude has charisma and influence.
Right. He very charismatically attacks Steve Sailer for accepting the historicity of the death of millions of Jews during World War II. But he does it with a lot of charisma and a lot of energy.
And there are young guys that are exposed to like him and people adjacent to him, and
and it poisons them, like it poisoned you, Ricardo.
The millennials, the 40-year-olds are talking to themselves. So,
yeah.
I mean, what do you think?
More than a few Jews are not even Zionist, and plenty of Jews are not complicit in what's been absolutely one.
I think there's just pools of money. There's people like the Adelsons and Ackman and things like that that have, like Elon Musk, the ability to like move pieces. They're not.
Yeah, and they donated to the Trump campaign, and as a result, we will have some immigration restriction rather than the immigration out of control that we had under Joe Biden.
Not the only faction.
Yeah, like we said earlier, we have the greatest lobby. So, look, to talk, Nick Fuentes.
And is the Israel lobby the greatest lobby? Perhaps in some perspectives, but there are plenty other equally effective, even more effective lobbies than the Israel lobby. The nature of the American political system incentivizes the creation of highly effective lobbies.
He's definitely a cultural phenomenon, without a doubt, and young people have been rallied to, supporting him because there are very few other options that's cool in politics. He somehow made like politics cool for.
Yeah, he's compelling for self-destructive 100 IQ people.
Young Zoomers, even in 2016, Richard Spencer's alt-right was aiming at like older millennials. Really, there wasn't anything for young kids, and something for young. I call them kids, but whatever. For young guys, basically young gamers, has to be of a different ilk, and it's not going to be about statistics and numbers and boring conversations.
Yeah, boring things like truth and empirical reality and logic.
It's going to be based in memes, and it is going to be something that differentiates basically on a black and white level. The problem that I have with Nick Fuentes is like that the whole Kanye shit and the debacle and what it's turned into, and that performance on Alex Jones, and
that was one of the best things that happened.
Right. So for Ricardo, this trip down mental illness lane that was tremendously damaging to Kanye West and everybody else who enjoyed and promoted that trajectory. This is what brings Ricardo joy. And he thinks it was the greatest and was the best, and this is wonderful, and this is what we need more of. And there's no reason to remonstrate with Ricardo for this. He's been poisoned by the alt-right.
The last 10 years, come on, man. That was like literally. But here's the thing.
This is one of the best things that happened in the last 10 years, right? Kanye West's self-destructive anti-Jewish spiral.
Like, that was not like unimportant. That was like, it was a big. I mean, that was a big deal.
But
in,
what
like,
did
opening
it
the conversation?
That was a big deal, opening an important conversation. That's sad. All right, what goes on here between Doovid and Stephen J. James yesterday?
You saw some of the stream with Luke Ford. Why do you think he kind of had an aneurysm towards the end of that stream? What did I do wrong?
Well, I mean, it's probably his own personal cognitive dissonance of not being able to come to terms with his past, which like a similar, like, just like if someone like, oh, Luke Ford, like, like I got turned on to pornography through you, and that's not the image that he's putting forward. Maybe that was never his intention. And certainly with like the alt-right or all these people, all these issues where he's completely tried to turn.
Yeah, there's a good point there. One reason I don't discuss many issues that have some connection with pornography is that I know from my own experience, even thinking about pornography and discussing pornography or hearing any discussion of pornography makes me more vulnerable to going out and whacking off to pornography. And thank God I've had substantial sobriety in that area for 12 years, and I don't want to relapse.
Turn the page, reinvent himself. So just too much dissonance to be like, do I even know you? Like, why are we talking? Do we even have anything in common? And then especially you're asking him all these like questions on the Jews where he's like, where he's forced to give different answers than like the last time you spoke. And
I wasn't planning to.
If I have a better answer, a more useful answer, a more profound answer, a more nuanced answer, a more helpful answer than I've given in the past, then yeah, I'm going to change and go with what's better.
Like, stump him on this. I just thought, wow, this is Luke's wheelhouse. He's talked about it like for 5 years, about Jews and their involvement in the alt-right, and I honestly thought I was softballing him.
No, I'm saying he just
You were softballing me, and I went to great effort to deliver the most insight and nuance that I could.
invented himself, and he really had nothing for you, and it was probably like difficult, like you said, like every answer he's.
I think that's a little tough. Did I really have nothing for you as a listener with regard to my Sunday stream with Stephen? That's a little harsh, Doovid.
It's like I guess like walking on eggs. She has to be extremely careful, and
it is a great idea at times to walk on eggs and to sit on a fence and to soft pedal stuff.
He probably hasn't came to terms. Like he basically is like pulling a frame game's Mike Benz. In the sense,
well, so you're saying he was deeply enmeshed in the alt-right. Yeah, he was sympathetic to it, and now he's trying to claim, no, he always kept it at a distance.
Now I'm claiming that at one point the alt-right was funny and sometimes touching on important issues, and the alt-right outlook was popularly understood as a kind of Breitbart level of politics. And then the alt-right became a group that was most famous for slaughtering innocent people in Walmarts, right? When it switched, my attitude towards it switched. When it was all fun and games, I enjoyed the hilarity. When it started slaughtering people, I changed.
Yeah, I mean, he's not quite like Mike Benz. Like, obviously, he's now one of the most famous people in the world, and the middle of power. He's got Elon Musk constantly retweeting him, Tucker Carlson, Tim Pool, but just to pull that it was a psyop. Like, he never believed any of the stuff. The purpose was a psyop in order to get people to like the Jews more. And Luke Ford's probably, I mean, he's not quite going that far, but he's saying he's like Piers Morgan. I'm just a journalist. Like, I was covering it because no one else was covering it, and. I mean, if you first we just talk Luke Ford because that's how we know each other, and
yes.
He's also my kind of rise into streaming, and I guess also because like most of my streaming had nothing to do with like the alt-right or the JQ. That's just what I was most popular for, and that's why I stopped streaming because like it was just me reading papers or Church of Entropy. We even stopped doing Week in Review, and then just like me reading papers or talking about philosophy in my audience.
So when I was blogging on the porn industry, it was easy for me to get 5,000, 10,000, 20,000 readers a day. And then when I started blogging on more substantial, more cognitively demanding topics, right, it became difficult to get 1,000 readers a day. So some topics are a lot more attention-grabbing than others, but usually the most attention-grabbing topics are the least good for you as a content producer and for those who consume that type of content.
It's like dwindled to like 3 people. I mean, a few people would watch and be like, yeah, great book on tape. Like, I listened to your show and I like the topics you talk about, and it's basically just like a book on tape. But I was, and most of the people that I spoke to, we weren't really friends. They just wanted.
And a comment in the chat, Luke, do you have any Christmas time traditions that persisted through your conversion to Judaism? No, because I wasn't raised with Christian traditions. We did not celebrate Christian Christmas in my home, right? So more traditional Seventh-day Adventists, the more devoted the Seventh-day Adventists, the less likely they were to celebrate Christmas. It was regarded as a pagan ritual in my home.
Information. I mean, so if you want, I'll give an update on kind of like the alt-right, the JQ. But first, like Luke Ford.
Let's gossip about Luke Ford first, because I mean,
kind of like Elon Musk, but
what people want.
I mean, Colin Liddell was.
So, am I just stroking my ego here, or do I have anything to contribute? Useful question in life and in live streaming.
Defending you or you're saying Elon Musk is really an anomaly. No one really knows. Because he's a public figure and there's so much information, anybody could hypothesize. But like what Elon Musk's motivations are, why he's doing what he does, no one really knows. So Luke Ford
Yes.
also, what's motivating, why he's doing what he's doing, no one really knows. And now his answer is kind of, now he's kind of saying he was just kind of like crying out for help. He was hoping like the more people.
I don't think it's that hard to understand. I went for an audience. I found a hot button topic that garnered an enormous audience. And then I found that the price paid for that type of live streaming was simply not worth pursuing.
People noticed him, he would get more help. But like obviously, like he was, when he had the most controversial people on the internet before.
And the chat says much of Christianity and Christmas traditions is in fact from pagan origins. Yeah, well, every religion comes from pagan origins, right? No religion just sprang straight out of the ground, right? Or religions take pre-existing motifs and practices and narratives and then transform them. So musical traditions don't spring out of the ground. They take pre-existing musical motifs and practices and then transform them. That's the way the world works. I'm coming back here 100 times if I have to. Ooh, I gotta take this.
He was basically like the only one interviewing these people. Even like that's why me or you or anyone tuned into him, not necessarily because you cared about Luke Ford, but because you wanted to hear like what Mike Enoch or Richard Spencer or Kevin McDonald or like he had almost the exclusive interviews with these people.
The best interviews, the best in my opinion.
Wait, but the best, the only ones, or the only like non like where it wasn't just like alt-right people talking.
You know what it was? It was the fact that somebody outside of the circle was asking him questions. Wherever we put Luke Ford, he definitely wasn't. He wasn't a Wignat. And the fact it was a non-Wignat asking questions made it a better interview. Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, so we have no idea why Luke was doing what he was doing, besides the fact, like, okay, even his Wikipedia says he, his narcissism and, Hollywood self-promotion. So in the sense, like, he wanted to be famous, he wanted to make a name for himself, he wanted to make a living, and, the most obvious, like, that he started streaming after he was on Warski, and he saw the money rolling in, and even he himself was like, after Warski, he basically started streaming every day, and that was enough to get him like 100 plus daily live viewers for hours, and he was getting super chats, and so it was basically like haphazard. He didn't necessarily plan on doing it, and because he got his big break on the Warski show, like he said, he narrowcasted to talk about the topics that he knew other people weren't talking about, and that he could build an audience doing, and that and he switched away from pornography, so he decided like alt-right. It's a big issue. It's rising. It's a niche type thing that has an audience, and there isn't much competition. So, a bunch of people like me and you tuned into Luke Ford because he was the only one covering, this topic. And for a few years, he built an audience. And then at some point, my original claim was like Brundlefly, that he knew, like, as an Orthodox Jew, he can't really, like, his audience was largely like anti-Semitic and people that just wanted bad information about Jews or to hear the debates, but he didn't really have that many Jews tuning into him. It was mostly counter-Semites, and most of them were just like, when you're going to get Mike Enoch on again, and or one of these type personalities, and he was able to develop some sort of base. But I guess being in Hollywood and understanding media, he knew he had that network and the connections, so he kind of created Brundlefly for that, which is just like, I can't keep on doing this. I can't keep on platforming people and hosting this. So, but he didn't want to completely give up whatever media accomplishments he had done by creating that audience. So he tried to spin off Brundlefly, and that probably, I don't know if it backfired, but from just telling people what they want to hear to where people like you and Brundlefly.
Wait, are you saying that Brundlefly was his Shabbos guy?
Well, I mean, so the either. Okay, so there's two elements that a lot of Jews were part of the alt-right. A lot of Jews are racists and do prefer white people, anti-immigration, and the original Trump camp, like Richard Spencer, they were like, yes, like what you were saying, like, yes, absolutely, Jews should team up with whites. Jews should try to stop the demographic change. Jews, lot is best off with European people. So like, there's unquestionably a reasonable segment of Jews, maybe even like 10, 20% of the Jewish population in the US, UK, that feel like that, especially Jews that aren't part of organizational Jewry. Like, the identity question is, if you don't really feel that Jewish, you're probably going to fall into some sort of, well, what am I? I'm white, I'm European. And so Luke Ford probably had that sentiment. However, almost all organizational Jewry has the exact opposite. Like almost all organizational Jewry is like, we're not white, we're Jewish, and you're promoting multicultural and immigration and all these various things. So Luke Ford, in the beginning, he might have been like a Halsey right-wing Jew, and he thought the right-wing Jews might win. And he thought like, the Jews might wake up and realize that immigration into America is not that good for them, and multiculturalism isn't good for them, and they should be pro-white. And so, I mean, that's possible. And then at some point he saw like, that's not going to happen. Like even his right-wing Orthodox Jewish friends in Hollywood are still basically pro-immigration multiculturalists, kind of like the modern Trump party that, like Luke's actual Jewish friends might behind closed doors say pretty racist things, but like politically they're more like Vivek Ramaswamy Republicans. And so he had to get off that ship, as the crackdown. And then he got, also got strikes on his YouTube channel, and his money making ability off of it wasn't really happening. So he changed ship, and then his friendships with Brundle were untenable because maybe he had that kind of racist pro-white element, and he was kind of hoping that the whites would win, and he was leading people like Brundlefly on, like we talked about at length on your show multiple times. And then at a certain point, Luke Ford just bailed ship, and rather than saying that he's a reformed racist, he just pulled the frame games. So he could have said like, yeah, like, I mean, he could have pulled like a Richard Spencer, the reformed racist. And like personally, like, I don't know what's in Luke Ford's heart, but I think it's more likely the reformed racist. But I'm saying he's not really going to go down that attitude, so he's just pulling like frame games to say like, okay, Brundle, Stephen, we were never really friends. I kind of like you guys, but like I was just promoting this stuff. You know how Hollywood works. It didn't work out, so like I can't have anything to do with you anymore. You got to understand.
He's maintained the HBD line, so I think, look, when
the Vivek Ramaswamy Trumpism or like Tucker, in the sense he's still right wing, he still might
right wing. Yeah, but HBD isn't Tucker or any of that. This is like when Coffness appeared on the scene, and it was this Jewish guy giving an answer finally to Kevin McDonald's Culture of Critique. But also Coffness is one of the HBD crowd guys. Human biodiversity, if people don't know what we're talking about. Basically, Luke Ford repackages it as different people have different gifts, and we can say that these are down to biology. And so he's kind of maintained that line all the way along, and I feel like that's because it's given an acceptability through Nathan Coffness and his associations. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean that's probably more accurate than the direction I was leading it. Like Luke Ford is basically like a Coffness, Amy Wax type figure that wants the Jews to team up with the whites. He believes in some form of meritocracy, and he thinks like Jews are basically deserve what they have. Like, I mean, there might be some problems with group conflict, but like generally Jews are smarter and work harder, and they get ahead. And the alt-right main mistake was not being friendly enough to Jews, and Jewish mistake was not recognizing the necessity of like the Jewish white coalition enough. But he can't even say that part, so he can't really be like an Amy Wax, like although that's probably kind of how he feels. And so like Nathan Coffness, is still his protege that he's kind of like hoping will become more popular. He would probably still like to be like an American Renaissance Unz type Republican right-wing Jew, but it didn't really work out that way. So he just, now it's not even clear like what he represents. He's not really part of a movement. So now he's just an independent political commentator that, I mean, still there. He still has ideas, but like, you had felt like he was on the forefront of a movement. He was bringing you new things. He was pushing new ideas. And that's what he said, like, okay, the alt-right, like, he puts it to like the Coffness critique. And I'm not even sure like the sensical, like, because that, if that's kind of like a sign where he said, well, the main problem with the alt-right was their anti-Semitism. And that's what he meant by the Coffness critique, or if he literally meant it like he said it, where like, no, the alt-right went wrong because they didn't recognize that Coffness was right. What does that even mean? That like the alt-right didn't recognize that Jews deserve to be dominant in the West because Coffness is right, and therefore, like the alt-right would have been more successful if Richard Spencer had chosen a bunch of like, Halsey type Jewish generals to lead the movement. And I mean, so it wouldn't surprise me if that's really what he thinks. But he's not straight up saying that. And whatever the case is, like that just puts him in too much of a distance. So he's like, just like me, like I'm an anti-Zionist, so most of my Jewish friends are just like, we can't be friends anymore. So that's kind of like Luke Ford. He's looking at his scenario right now, He's looking at like you and Brundle, and it's like we just can't be friends anymore. It's not practical. It's not practical for me and my success. Maybe we were friends in a different scenario. The past, maybe that was legitimate, maybe not. But like, do me a favor, help me out. Like, just recognize like we can't be friends anymore. I got to move on with my life. Please don't make it difficult on me.
Yeah, let me say this. I don't know if he'll ever come on the show on my channel again.
I don't think you wronged him in
but-
that sense. I think it was just practical. Where it was like he didn't. It was just like
I thought I was
the
softballing him.
practicality. Like, we can't be friends anymore. I'm sorry, Steve.
Yeah, I mean, he's at once and the same time he's acknowledged to me that he thinks it was a great interview. But then, like, he coped about it on his stream for about 20 minutes. And in essence, what he was saying when he went on his stream. So if any of you haven't watched it yet, go and watch the last hour of my interview with Luke Ford. It went from it's my fault for turning turning it from just being like, I don't know, talking about nonsense, shooting the breeze. Basically, we could have been talking about the weather for the first hour. And then I thought, oh my God, well, look, let's get some substance out of Luke. Luke's been dealing with the alt-right since forever. He's the guy who first broached what are Jews doing here in the alt-right question. Let's talk about it. And I think what it was touching on, like, you know what is acceptable about Nathan Coffness and the HBD stuff is it's all about individualism. But what I was asking is what are group motives? And Luke seems to now be unable to touch that question with a barge pole about group motivations. He will deny it to your face that there's any such thing as group motivations, basically. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, so it just notes kind of like characteristics, like general, like Anglo or Jewish character traits. So how, if you're dealing with a Jewish individual, they might display these characteristics, but whether that means that people act as a group, that he would largely reject. So like, I mean, if that's what he means, that like Coffness is saying Jews rise to prominence due to individual Jewish excellence, high IQs living in urban areas, but not due to any collective Jewish behavior. And so, in that sense, that's at least the line that Luke is going to toe. That that Coffness, like any individual Jew, even though they might go to shul together or share these common beliefs, that's not what helped them rise to excellence. It was their individual excellence that rose to excellence, and then kind of diverting the JQ, and then the question, well, like the whataboutism, to saying, well, what about Episcopalians or other people that have these similarities to Jews? So he's kind of defending the JQ to a certain point, where maybe he was also like a contrarian, like before it was dangerous, where Luke Ford was kind of pushing the JQ in 2016 because it wasn't really that dangerous for so he could forward the arguments of anti-Semites, counter-Semites, because it didn't feel dangerous for him and his Jewish community or the Jewish community at large, because like anti-Semitism wasn't really dangerous for Jews at that time. And then I guess Colin Nidell's defense of you, because then he's also kind of like, well, these guys are kind of just like losers and have no effect, and 99% of people who get involved with this are making their life worse, comparing him to like OnlyFans models. And so Colin Nidell was kind of like defending that, like, no, like people like Stephen James, like there's demand, there's legitimate questions, there's legitimate problems that needs to be given a voice to, and like although the leaders of the alt-right, many of them are problematic, they're not just like losers or ruining their lives, like and certainly like possibly with the rise of Trump, some of the talking points of anti-wokeness or immigration, that character identity of the West has taken the mainstream. So that wasn't, and you didn't go down the line like Luke, just his opinion, like maybe the people he followed kind of faded into oblivion as or like Nick Fuentes, the gripers, but he didn't seem to. You mentioned like Keith Woods or even like people like Greg Johnson or people that are still at it, or like Millennial Woes. Like, I'm not following the movement, but I assume that the 80% of people on Millennial Woes, Millennial U or whatever, are people who are legitimately like pushing forward and doing things, and I'm just not following because I don't know what they are, who they are, or what they're doing. And then there's also kind of like, well, unfortunately, White's lost. Like, I mean, when I came in, I was like, of course, White's lost. You lost a long time ago. Like, even thinking that Trump was going to possibly save you was like, I was saying that in 2016. Like no, like White's lost a long time ago. Like, you're never getting your countries back. But like, there was still that slight hope in 2016 that like Trump or Whites might take the country back. And so now at this point, like there's basically no hope. No one in the dissident alt-right, pro-white movement thinks that they're going to get America back. And maybe even in the UK, certainly the situation has gotten worse. And
Right, okay. Well, let me ask you then directly, David. Why, if Jews are so smart, this is the question I asked Luke. I wasn't accusing Jews. To be clear, I was not accusing Jews of being responsible for the demographic collapse, for the demographic change, for immigration. I was not doing that. What I was saying is, if Jews are so smart, why aren't they teaming up with white people to protect their position as like at the top of the ruling class? Jews have never had it so good in America. They're basically worshipped by white people, put on a totem pole. They've never had it so good. And I likened it to the scorpion and the frog. If they're so clever, why can't they see the demographic collapse coming and thinking, holy shit? I mean, even if there's like, I know, whatever you're going to tell me, middleman opportunities.
Like some goy for failing to understand that. Like, no, like multicultural immigration is in Jewish best interest. And
yeah, but hold on. If you're going to tell me it's the middleman, it's good for the middleman.
Jews. Like immigration, multiculturalism is bad for Jews in Israel, but it's not bad.
Here we go.
UK. It's good for Jews in the UK, in the West, in America. It's only bad for white people.
Yeah, but it's such short-termism. I mean, you can't predict the future. You can't predict the future.
Multiculturalism and immigration is good for the Jews. Like, I don't know
why.
What part of your dumb goy head, like, don't you understand that
because
it's bad for you, it's not bad for the Jews. It's good for the Jews.
Why?
You honestly think that somehow multiculturalism and immigration is going to be bad for the Jews in the West?
Well, I'm asking the question. Surely it's a risk. Surely it's a fucking risk, Doovid. That
it's a risk for you. How's it a risk for the Jews?
Because Jews have never had it so good at the top of the totem pole in America, and you're putting everything on the line to hope that you'll somehow be able to, like, I don't know, keep being the managers of society once you've brought in the third world. It's not guaranteed.
Well, nothing's guaranteed, but it's saying, like, okay, the Jews only have it so good now because of 50 years of immigration and multiculturalism, and Jews remember pre-1965 when they were part of a white majority, the difficulties. Like, okay, maybe Jews still had wealth and to some extent, but like, no, it was very difficult for Jews when it was just Jews and whites. And now Jews are at the pinnacle of their power. I mean, if you look at it like, just basic, like Nick Fuentes, like your average white person saying, like, we should be running our own country. We should be running ourselves. We don't want Jews in charge of us. So 75 years ago, when whites were a super majority in every urban area, Jews had very little power. There was zoning, there was redlining, there were all sorts of clubs that didn't allow Jews as members, and it was like that in almost every major area. Like even New York City, you had your Gentile white clubs, law firms, businesses that they sidelined Jews, and now there's not a single major urban area in America that's still majority white. But Jews and Jews are dominant in most of these areas. Like, okay, Miami, Chicago, New York, Baltimore, Los Angeles. The Jews teamed up for the first black mayor in Los Angeles like 60 years ago in order to because they felt they weren't getting a fair shake from white people. They were being forced out of power. That white people didn't allow meritocracy because they didn't want to be ruled by Jews. And that's the multiculturalism that's changed that. So yeah, certainly, like, Jews face violence and crime, like, okay, because Jews live in most urban areas and you have the immigration, that's why you have so many Jewish alt-righters, because that's what Colin Liddell was saying. Most of the racism from whites are coming from multicultural urban areas. So most of the Jewish racists are people who are they're tired of getting beat up by blacks, they're tired of multiculturalism, they're tired of all this Islam. But overall, for Jewish power, it's good because it's diminished the main competition to Jews was whites, and the main weapon that whites had in keeping Jews out of power was by their supermajority. So it seems just obvious without like a Keith Woods type thing that the continued more multiculturalism, more immigration will continue to benefit Jews in the West. In Israel,
so your position is that the Great Replacement, and we've got to be careful because we're on YouTube, even though you are Jewish and you are espousing this, you're telling me that the Great Replacement, God forbid, is it an organized
Jews? You're saying a conspiracy theory that Jews are orchestrating.
Is it an organized conspiracy?
Well, I mean, if you're saying that the conspiracy, like the Great Replacement, like you're being replaced by Jews, is different than just saying that the continued demographic change and decrease of white majority.
Yes, that's what we're talking about. The loss of whites becoming a minority in their own country. That's the thing that the dissident right is here to talk about. That's what
why
we
main came.
all
That's
care
why I
about.
main came on. Like my main issue from the beginning was always defending immigration. Luke Ford at the beginning was like an anti-immigration activist, and he was basically like a racist. The first time I talked to him, like he asked me all these questions, like, "Aren't blacks just violent? How can you get along with blacks? How can you live with blacks?" And so that kind of like Luke Ford, the reformed racist, he's not portraying himself that way. But certainly there's a lot of Jews that agree with him in that there's a lot of Jews that are racist or think that look at all the problems like that there's a lot of problems with non-white minorities that in some way whites are better, but like overall for Jewish safety and Jewish power, the continued demographic change. And Luke Ford himself used to say, every single Jewish organization in America, there's not a single Jewish organization in America that's anti-immigration. And the Trump ban, like even with Muslims, even the thing that possibly would benefit the Jews most, basically every major Jewish organization spoke up against Trump's Muslim ban. And like the right-wing Jews in the Trump administration, like are basically pushing back against immigration. Like the connection, and like I know as a Jew, the issue that American Jews care about most is immigration, even more than Israel. Like you look at the polling, of anything, of all the issues that Jews care most about, it's immigration. And you could say different reasons, but Jews don't necessarily like looking at it purely utilitarian, where like okay, we're supporting immigration because we want to feel safe, or because we want to lessen the competition for whites for management and power. Jews might have a more sympathetic, like we know what it's like to be
all right.
persecuted
So is it a
or
collective
immigrants. But
is it a kind of collective unconsciousness, or is it a conspiracy that is being played out in real time?
You call it conspiracy to say Jews are not the reason why immigrants are coming to the West. That's the conspiracy. Just to say that who benefits, to say Jews benefit from immigration, the continued demographic change, doesn't mean that they're the ones who are causing it. Although Jewish organizations might use.
No, I'm not accusing them of causing it. I'm asking why they're not interested in teaming up to keep.
It benefits. Like, what do you understand about that? It benefits Jews. Why would Jews team up against something that benefits them?
Yeah, but it doesn't benefit the average Jew on the street. So
it does.
Like surely not. It doesn't benefit Elliot.
Even your hometown, there's close to no Jews where you live, right?
I guess not. I guess not.
Even the
Very few in
demographic
England.
displacement of where you're from, overall, probably benefits Jews. I mean, it's like maybe it's somewhat neutral, but it's like what advantage is there to Jews?
But the degradation of
area
all society, the degradation of society as a whole, is worse for all of us, surely.
Well,
Services get worse, crime goes up.
No, I mean the degradation of society as a whole doesn't affect Jews that much. I mean, like I lived in New York, and like Jews have always lived in urban areas, and Jews tend to live in some of the most degraded areas. And Jews even have a way of thriving. That's why Jews have insular communities that protect itself, and also it creates. Once it's multicultural, there's no longer a push to assimilate. Where it's just like okay, like historically in the West, like the distant memories, really that didn't even exist in my lifetime, of when it was just Jews and whites, and like can't you just be like everybody else? Like why can't you assimilate to Anglo norms? And so like your average Jew is like, no, I do not want to assimilate to your norms, even if I have to completely destroy your country and support immigration and have all these different type people. I would rather have that than assimilate to your norms. And it's just like okay, like no Jew could move into your area now, because it's just this like a homogenous white area where a Jew wouldn't fit in. Maybe like there's a handful of Jews that could white pass and would be able to assimilate into your area, but a Jew wouldn't be able to move to your area as a Jew. But
Hold on, a handful. It's most of them in America. Most of them are
multicultural. Then you could have a Jewish section of your town.
Most of them are white-skinned, even blonde-haired, blue-eyed. You say this yourself in America.
But it's saying like just because they could shave and give up their religion, they're saying that just because they're white.
Yeah, Orthodox ones don't want. Orthodox ones want to
they don't want to have to assimilate to fit in.
Yeah, okay.
So if it's multicultural, you don't have to assimilate to fit in.
That's not the majority. The majority aren't Orthodox. The majority aren't ones who are worried about assimilating. The majority are ones like Elliot running around thinking, what the
Elliot
heck's
doesn't
going
want
on?
to assimilate into white culture.
He already is.
No, he's in San Francisco and saying like he might want like to date a white woman or something.
We've already claimed him. It's too late for Elliot. We've claimed him.
Elliot does not want to assimilate into white culture.
He's assimilated.
How is he assimilated into white culture?
Of course he is.
What does it mean? What do you mean assimilated?
He's basically an average. He's
a
one of
white
us
word?
now. We've taken him away from you. He's a guy now.
I mean, you can
Elliot
have
is a
him. I'm
guy.
not trying to. He's already only half Jew, but I'm saying like, how is Elliot assimilated into white culture?
Because he doesn't go around just like he doesn't go around just going Jew, and just wanting to be separate.
What does it mean to be white? What does it mean to be assimilated to white culture? Just because
Eat burgers, grill, swim at the beach, go for a walk at the beach, do I don't know,
that's not white
Buddhism,
culture.
whatever.
Did he join a church? Is he like part of like the Birch Society? Like, I mean, as far as Elliot, like.
Well, we're talking about San Francisco culture here, which is a bit weird in itself.
About that. San Francisco is also minority white.
But the culture was defined by weird white people who like far out man, surfing, drugs, I don't know,
drugs
gay
is
sex.
Culture? Free sex is white culture? Like, no, I'm saying like.
No, I mean. well, look, they're downstream.
You got to define white.
No,
culture.
it's not making.
You're saying like.
Okay. Well, tell me how. Okay, then. Well, I'll turn it back on you. Tell me how Elliot is still segregated as a Jew. Tell me how he has not assimilated.
Well, I mean, he's assimilated into probably like a multicultural bohemian, and that's only possible because it's not like if.
All right, I might give you that.
Elliot,
okay.
If Elliot was in a majority white place like where you come from, there would be multiple things that they would want Elliot to do that he would not want to do. And the main reason why Elliot would not want to do those things is basically because like he's Jewish, he has a different identity, and just like, okay, like it's Christmas, like Elliot, like I don't want to celebrate Christmas, or like whatever the various things, like he would say, I don't want to do those things. I'm not the same as you. I'm different than you. But so he's assimilated.
We don't expect him to start, celebrating Christmas.
You would.
Just saying that. No, I'm just saying
Maybe
that
you
in general.
because you're already urban bohemian. But it's saying like if you were a Jew in a homogenous white area, those other people you were amongst would want you to basically assimilate completely to all the various things. And anything else would be like, well, why you're different? Well, you're different because you're a Jew. And
okay, but it's not that much different. Okay, even if I grant you everything,
it's like in an urban area where like what it means to be normal means like surfing or doing drugs. But if you're in like a homogenous white area where like what means to be normal is like everyone goes to the same church or believes the same thing, or like listens to country music, or like the actual cultural things that are significant about being European. Like even Elliot, he's not gonna want to do that. He's a bohemian. He thrives in an urban area where he can just do what he wants.
Yeah, but that is a lot of white people now, and I just want to push back a little because look, whilst
Sorry about that. Just talking to my mates in Australia. Family, friends come first. Was there anything that was discussed on the Stephen J. James stream with Doooovid that you just listened to over the previous 30 minutes that I should share my profound commentary on? So let me scroll back through the last 30 minutes of the chat.
Like the culture of like San Francisco area is today predominantly informed by like the Beat Generation and the movement that in the San Francisco Flower Power movement and all this kind of shit that flourished there. This is an out product of white cultural liberalism, maybe in excess and all that kind of stuff. Maybe
wrong. Like the hippieism, the Beat Generation was a pushback against white culture. Haight-Ashbury, San Francisco in the 60s, even the Beat Generation, like like Allen Ginsberg, Alan Watts, that was the pushback against white culture. And even the Beat Generation of the 50s was already multiculturalism. The pushback is like, we're tired of white dominant culture and we're going to create something bohemian. And they started taking multicultural elements and adding to it that was already in the 50s. And when the hippie movement,
what was multicultural about it?
That was already of a form of integration of including blacks and Indians and Hindu type stuff. So like San Francisco was already at the forefront in the 60s of the pushback against white culture.
It might have been a pushback against the norms of white culture.
If it wasn't a pushback against white culture.
Well, it might have been a degradation. It might have been an attempt to overturn
traditions.
Yes. Okay, tradition. Okay, I'll give you that.
They were pushing back against the dominant white norm of.
Yeah, but it was mainly white people doing it. I know Allen Ginsberg was a Jew. What are you telling me? It was like some kind of Jewish subversion op, or was it white people who've like gone off, done too many drugs and were just like going a bit wild and saying, we're tired of the taboos of society.
Yeah, but I'm saying if you have white hippies and saying, okay, they still might have group affinity that you had largely like in the San Francisco in the 60s was still Haight-Ashbury was still largely white, but they created something new, and it wouldn't be fair to call that white culture. It was a pushback against white culture, and it became multicultural. It was the same time as the Immigration Act and civil liberties and all the education of the African Americans, and the hippies were the ones who were on the side of the liberal reforms. The hippies were the ones that were on the side of immigration. They were on the side of integration. They were on the side of all the various things that came in the 60s. And that was a pushback against the 50s when segregation was the norm. We're talking about my mom, who, of that era where there was a certain point where segregation was the norm, and you have it called like the Leave It to Beaver, your 50s white American Protestant culture, and the hippie movement largely destroyed that. After that, you no longer had your traditional white culture, and although like whites were still dominant, so there were still hippies that are largely white or boomers that are largely white, all of those people accepted the reforms of the 60s. All of them accepted that segregation was wrong. All of them accepted that immigration restrictions were wrong. There's no like anti-immigrant hippies.
No, yeah, but all this came way after, like George says, look, all this came way after. Are you telling me that the culture of like the Beach Boys was Jewish? I mean, this is just...
Okay, thank you, Stephen. All right, what are the elites hiding from you? This is Tom Woods TV, bro. My God.
Get ready to take a flamethrower to the official narrative and learn what the elites don't want you to know.
Wow.
You're listening to the Tom Woods Show.
Now, there is truth to that, right? Elites, when surveyed, are much more in favor of free speech censorship and restrictions on the things you can say on social media than normal Americans. And elites have a much higher view, a much more positive view of elites than do normal Americans. There are all sorts of substantial, important differences between elites and your average American. God, this is exciting.
Hey everybody, Tom Woods here. It is episode 2586 of the Tom Woods Show, and we have Carl Benjamin with us, director of LotusEaters.com. Carl, I didn't check, but we've spoken on this show a long time ago, but it was like a long time ago. I've been doing this for 11 years. So I don't know how long it's been, but I think you are, I wouldn't say you're a different person than you were in those days, but I think your thinking might have evolved a little bit. And so I thought there were a bunch of things that you and I might talk about, but all the same, welcome back.
Thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
So you're over there in the UK. Now that itself leads to a series of questions. What it's like being a dissident in the UK, because just when we feel like in the US we have it bad, then I get complaints from my friends in the UK saying, oh, geez, I wish we had the strength, of a dissident voices that you guys have. But first, how would you describe your politics?
I don't really have a label for it. There's an emerging space
labels.
that I guess is just being called post-liberal.
No labels. That's a powerful label.
It's filled with people who were previously liberals of some stripe, but have realized that liberalism itself is actually the problem with modern day politics, the construction of the philosophy of liberalism. And many of them have actually spent a lot of time studying liberalism right to its original philosophical foundations, myself included, and found that this doesn't really make sense. And so something has to come after it, because actually the trajectory liberalism puts us on is good at the beginning, but it ends in a place that's very undesirable. And we're actually arriving at that undesirable place right now. And so best to do something else rather than continue to be liberals. So I haven't really got...
So when you put too much weight on something, it reminds me, I had nothing good going on in my life, except I was in, a hot romantic or sexual relationship. And so I put too much weight on that relationship and it collapsed. If I'd only put an appropriate level of weight on it, it might have lasted a lot longer. You put too much weight on liberalism, you demand too much of Judaism, you demand too much of other people. If you ask of other people more than they want to give you, if you seek more satisfaction in your job than is honestly really there, that's not a winning strategy for life. So if you ask less of liberalism, so ask not what you can do for liberalism. Ask what liberalism can do for you, and a little bit of liberalism, like a little bit of salt, a little bit of flavor, a little bit of seasoning in a soup can help make it delicious, right? There are good things about liberalism. It can enhance your society. Understanding liberalism and an appropriate mixture of liberalism into your society's governing structure is a good thing. There were some things that John Locke was right about, and there were other things regarding the state of nature where Thomas Hobbes was more accurate. So Thomas Hobbes saw the state of nature is a brutal place where life is short and nasty. John Locke saw the state of nature in a much more benign fashion where people could make agreements, form contracts, form alliances, and just a much, much happier place. And there are times and circumstances where the John Locke perspective is more accurate, more valuable than the Thomas Hobbes perspective. Overall, I'm more of a Hobbesian than a Lockean, but a lot of good stuff in John Locke, a lot of good stuff in Thomas Hobbes, a lot of good stuff in liberalism as a basis for government. Just don't ask too much of it. Like, don't ask too much from me. Don't ask too much from your mother. Don't ask too much from conservatism. Don't ask too much from Christianity. Don't ask too much from your job, from your neighbor. Just seek what is true and appropriate, and enjoy the benefits that your coworker brings to your life. And don't get mad that your coworker who's an accountant is not brilliantly funny. And don't get mad at your friend who's brilliantly funny is not good at accounting. Like, don't ask me to check the plane engines before the plane takes off. Ask me to share my opinion on Niger.
A name for what I am, but I try not to be ideological at this point. I think the nature of ideology itself is the problem, and it's something that we should essentially repudiate, because it drives us down the path of nonsensible politics. And what I mean by nonsensible is politics that doesn't have anything to do with the information our senses are giving us about the world. California is a superb example of this, with homelessness and drug use. A sensible position is we have to do something about the homelessness and drug use. And the ideological liberal position is, yes, we need to make sure they've got clean needles.
So I've never used illegal drugs, but I have been homeless. I lived out of my car for about 3 months when I came to Los Angeles. I didn't have any money because I was too busy giving it away in Hollywood acting scams so that I could feel like I had a legitimate shot at an acting career. So I lived out of my car, and there's a time and a place for homelessness, perhaps for some people, but overall is a manifestation for lack of care that I take for myself, my callousness with regard to my own best interests, and that same kind of slovenliness and sloppiness that I would then deliver to other people. One of the first things that my therapist talked to me about in 1998 was developing boundaries. I had really sloppy, weak boundaries, and it took a while before I understood more appropriately what was mine, what was appropriately taking care of myself, and where I should ask for permission rather than just grab them by the pussy. God forbid.
That's not the answer, actually. That's not humane. That's not good. But that is liberal. That's a very liberal perspective, because as far as they're concerned, the person chooses to use drugs or is a victim of the drugs themselves. And those things are both valid, and the idea of making them stop using drugs is not really valid. In fact, they might say on a personal level, well, I find that undesirable. But really,
there is a case to be made for allowing clean needles so that people are less likely to destroy themselves. I mean, think about yourself at your lowest when you're making the worst choices. Would you have preferred that society put a few more guardrails in place, incentivized you to make better decisions, enhanced your chances of survival? So I'm not a complete libertarian. I believe that society should put in some guardrails. I don't think children should have access to pornography. I don't think people should have to encounter pornography unless they deliberately seek it out and perhaps jump through one or two hoops, such as registering with their ISP before they get access to pornography. I think that it's a bad idea to make it really easy to gamble, particularly on sports. So I am for a moderate amount of guardrails and some incentives. I am for a more tribal and communal understanding of how we live and work and operate and have our being than just the individual making decisions with his own strategic buffered cognitive powers.
We should intervene and simply prevent them from getting drugs, force them to go to treatment centers until they're clean and back on their feet.
On the other hand, there is a good case to be made for just allowing fentanyl to rip and wipe out all those who use drugs recreationally. That there's a case to be made for that.
It's not kind to just make sure they've got clean needles, for example. And it's those kinds of problems that liberalism has created that it has no answers to, that shows that it is not a comprehensive philosophy for human life, let alone for what the problems we face now. Because the problems we face now are the success of liberalism, they're the outgrowth of liberalism. We didn't.
So everything comes with a good side and a downside. Growing up as a Hasidic Jew comes with many powerful benefits. I love the many Hasidic Jews that I know, I revere and honor so much that is beautiful in their community, and their lack of secular education predisposes many Hasidic Jews to certain problems, including, God forbid, cheating and theft and welfare dependency. So many beautiful things about Hasidic Judaism, but it comes with some downsides. There are many beautiful things about Seventh-day Adventism. I did not find it satisfying. I moved on, but I recognize tremendous nurturing qualities to Seventh-day Adventism. There are formidable beauties to Roman Catholicism, and yet some people raised Roman Catholic are better off leaving the church. There are beauties to an atheistic, secular, humanist perspective on life, and yet some people are better off leaving that and adopting some religion. Some people are better off adopting a moderate amount of religion. Other people are better off adopting a substantial amount of religion. Some people are better off going to therapy every week. Other people would be better off never going to therapy. So everything comes with a good side and a bad side. I just had a profound realization. I put before you this day a choice of life and death. Choose life.
We faced them before because we didn't have such an advanced version of this philosophy controlling everything that we do. And so that's the position I found myself in.
So would you say that also maybe the reason we hadn't seen it in such a degenerate form is that we were still operating a little bit on borrowed time, and that we still had some Christian inheritance, we had some tradition of acting like civilized people?
Yeah, liberalism goes well with nationalism, right? Liberalism, nationalism, pretty good formula for a society, and then some individuals need to add religion to the mix, right? Just because liberalism is not a all-encompassing one narrative that you need for life doesn't mean that it doesn't have its place. There are a lot of jobs that I would totally suck at, and then there are some other jobs where I'm pretty good.
That was left over for a long time, and those were the fumes, and you can still kind of putt along a little bit on the fumes, but now we don't have even the fumes.
Yeah.
Right. There is perhaps some degree of anti-Semitism that is overall good for Jews in America. Improves group cohesion, gives more group identity, reduces the chances of intermarriage, right? But there's certainly a level of anti-Semitism where your life is in danger that I would not like to see rip in America.
Yeah, I think that's a good characterization of the problem, especially as the kind of old traditional morality that infused our civilization in almost every layer of the civilization.
I don't really know Sargon of Akkad that well. Don't really know this bloke, Carl Benjamin, but the way he's speaking now, it's hard for me to believe that he's having a devastatingly destructive effect on the lives of people who follow him.
Was just always there, and it was never really properly identified, but it was always something, like your grandmother would, when you were being told off by your grandmother, it was more impactful than being told.
So I had an economics professor for 2 classes at UCLA, Russell Roberts, who's now the head of a liberal arts college in Jerusalem and also the host of the Econ Talk podcast. And he noted that, according to Rene Descartes, we should examine our moral views very carefully, and if they are inadequate, then we should rip them out and replace them. That was one dominant perspective on morality, the liberal, disengaged, buffered identity, enlightenment perspective on morality. And then the other perspective on morality is the traditional one, and that is you should just do what your grandma says. And most people are better served by doing what their grandma says rather than trying to figure out morality on their own. On the other hand, there are some people who are better off ignoring what their grandmother says.
Told off by like a teacher or something, because she would pull on something deep and personal and sentimental in the back of your mind, and she would have language that we actually don't really use too much now to make you feel ashamed of the thing that you were doing. And all of this has been thinned out, and this kind of...
So I don't know about you, but often there are things I've said and done, and when it's raised in some company, I feel proud and amused, and when the very same thing is raised in other company, I feel mortified and ashamed.
Of moral color to the world has kind of drained out at this point. So now we have essentially what is sort of contractual morality, and that's not sufficient for all of the things that happen in the world, and that doesn't help us actually deal with those problems and explain why we've got to this point. For example, the recent drama or scandal about the woman who slept with 100 men a day.
I saw your video on that.
Yeah, the liberals can't find the problem with that, because they say, well, they all consented to it. They all signed forms for it. So there's nothing morally objectionable about this, but she herself could feel there was something morally objectionable about it by the fact that she cried at the end of it. Everyone can tell this is not normal, this is not healthy, and actually there is a non-liberal morality that used to fill this moral space, and we used to be able to pull on that when we wanted to explain why this was something wrong, even if we couldn't rationally explain why it was wrong. It was still a felt emotion. And without that, we arrive at a point...
Right. Conservatives are much more leery at radically changing morality, such as embracing gay marriage, because we fear that once you start pulling on the threads of the traditional morality, that the whole superstructure might fall down, and we don't know which thread is most damaging. So just leave the traditional morality in place. So I don't know if you have Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, but if you got a challenge, I find it really useful to get a name for it. So my father, he knew that he should not get mentally activated, say 2 hours before he goes to bed, because he could then experience a sleepless night because he didn't know how to turn his mind off. And I have the same problem, right? I will periodically get intellectually activated and I cannot turn my mind off, and I may end up sleeping badly for days until I am just a wreck. And there's a name for this condition, Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. So you probably want to learn about this, don't you?
About the hypermobility syndromes, that they see knotted up muscles and tight muscles and are overzealous in trying to get them to loosen up without realizing that might be further destabilizing the joints. But on to sleep problems. So you'll see in a few minutes why you need an introduction to the autonomic nerve.
I love it when I get a new accurate diagnosis for something that ails me. I suffer from maladaptive daydreaming. Found that a useful perspective.
Nervous system in order to understand why sleep is haywire in patients with Ehlers-Danlos related.
So I will get activated and my mind will not turn off for days, and I'll just have days of terrible, terrible sleep.
Hypermobility syndromes and related autonomic nervous system disorders.
So I see a neighbor who walks around with a cane, right? He is in tremendous distress because he's got perhaps a more severe form of Ehlers-Danlos syndrome than I do. So he needs a cane to get around.
So as a very basic introduction, the autonomic nervous system regulates all body processes that go on automatically. So
Stop it. I'm trying to create a high
blood
quality
pressure,
show.
breathing, digestion, regulation of body temperature, all these things that fortunately you don't have to think about. They're happening automatically while you're sitting here. Autonomic dysfunction turns out.
So you probably have no idea of other people's physiology and what their challenges are. And so there may be all sorts of parts of their behavior and speech and a large number of their choices that you find unfathomable, that with a little bit more knowledge, you'd go, oh, poor bloke's just got Ehlers-Danlos and related syndromes. A panoply of paradoxes.
That to be a very common feature of Ehlers-Danlos and other hypermobility-related syndromes, by which I would include things like fibromyalgia and chronic fatigue syndrome. And autonomic dysfunction underlies a lot of the symptoms. Tonight we'll just be focusing on sleep, and I'm going to show you that the most common type of sleep disorder we see in patients with Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, I think, has an autonomic basis. So the autonomic nervous system is a pretty simple system. I find it convenient, easy to explain to people that it's kind of like having an accelerator and a brake. Pretty much all your body systems run at a certain speed. If you need to, you can speed them up. If you need to, you can slow them down. If you start exercising, you're going to kick in a little adrenaline, you're going to hit the gas, you're going to raise your heart rate and blood pressure to send more blood to your muscles. If you're going to sleep or you've just eaten, hopefully you're going to take your foot off the gas and you're going to stimulate your brake or your parasympathetic nervous system. So the major concept, the crux of autonomic...
So my father could not socialize like a normal bloke because socializing in the hours prior to bed was very likely to trigger him mentally, and then he just couldn't turn it off, and he'd be a wreck for days.
Autonomic dysfunction in these syndromes is what I call failure to modulate. Now, when the autonomic nervous system is working properly, your body detects small changes in things like heart rate or blood pressure or body temperature and says, okay, gee, you know, blood sugar's gotten a little bit low, we need to bring it back.
So here's how I experience life. I get a stimulus, my adrenaline is racing, and it's days before I can turn it off.
Up again a little bit, and you stay in this, things stay in a very narrow range. Autonomic dysfunction in these syndromes, the opposite happens. You don't stay in a normal, you're going haywire, or what I often refer to as the autonomic roller coaster.
All right, this is how I experience life.
So, and the central paradox, and I call this talk a panoply of paradoxes, meaning a whole...
So I understand why some people with this would self-medicate with alcohol or with Valium and then get into trouble, because it sucks going days without enough sleep.
Collection, you'll hear me use that word half a dozen times, is that very counterintuitively, the more run down, overtired, stressed out, what I call depleted you get, the more your autonomic nervous system overreacts to minor stresses. So you'd think, gee, I'm exhausted, little things are just going to sort of bounce off me without my even.
Right, so a little thing when I'm tired and just my physiology just goes haywire.
Noticing them, and in fact, in these syndromes, just the opposite happens. So you're exhausted, and your body keeps, the energy you're trying to save gets wasted with your body overreacting to every little stress that comes along.
So one symptom of Ehlers-Danlos is what he's talking about. Another symptom is hypermobile joints. And this can be at great risk for your life, or it can just be, you know, a mild, moderate additional risk. So I can do all sorts of things with my fingers and knuckles and joints that a normal person would not and should not do.
And unfortunately, what often happens is then your body has this overreaction that says, well, wait a minute, now the heart...
So, for example, I can tuck my ankles behind my knees, but it's not really a good thing for a bloke to be able to do.
Rate's going up too much, blood pressure's going up too much, you better slow down. And of course, you don't slow down like this, you slow down like this. And then it's, whoa, wait a minute, now the heart rate's too low, blood pressure's too low, we better hit the gas again. And here's what that roller coaster looks like. So I won't show you all the details of this, except I think a good illustration, if I can get this pointer. Let's see, where's that?
Come on, man, I'm trying to run a high-quality show here. What the hell?
Okay. So if we look right here, in this part of this test, and this is a simple in-office test where we can measure parasympathetic and...
I should be doing so many more shows on Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. This is the path to popularity, to viral moments, to wealth, and it's the path I've not taken. This is crazy.
Sympathetic function independently. So at this point in the test, I've lost my cursor again.
Man, come on,
this
doctor.
Is when we ask the patient
Dr.
to stand.
Pocinki?
So I hate to use the word normal, the N word, but in a normal person, your body makes a short increase. As you stand, your blood pressure drops, blood flow to your brain drops a little bit. Your body kicks in a little extra adrenaline, raises your heart rate, raises your blood pressure. But then almost immediately, your body does a bunch of other things. It mobilizes blood that's been sitting around unused into the circulation. It constricts blood vessels a little bit. So very quickly, you're able to take your foot off of the gas and reach a new equilibrium point. And people with autonomic problems, what happens is they overreact. So stand up, blood flow to the brain drops, your body panics, hits the gas too hard, and then your body says, wait a minute, now the blood pressure.
Right, and combine this with ADHD, and you are just all over the place.
Going up too much, the heart rate's going to better slow down, and almost instantaneously hit the brake even harder. And that's the basic physiology of orthostatic intolerance, or how people with autonomic problems faint. And if you understand that, you understand more about orthostatic intolerance than most cardiologists do. So again, the paradox here is this explains why we use medications like beta blockers to reduce lightheadedness and syncope. Because if you block up, you won't get that big drop. Again, totally counterintuitive, because your blood pressure is so low that you feel like you're going to faint. Why would you take a medicine that lowers your blood pressure? And the answer is because you want to block that. And you see here that then it doesn't stop with this. Then wait a minute, okay, now it's too low, I better hit the gas. No, that's too much gas, I better hit the brake again. Now it's too much brake, I better hit the gas again. And this person's been standing for 5 minutes and her body still can't get her heart rate and blood pressure regulated. And also, look.
Now, young Kip recommends the following excerpt from this Sargon of Akkad appearance. And if you don't like this excerpt, you get no value from it, then direct your disdain at Kip. Right? I'm just a humble servant of the truth. Right? I am just the voice of the people.
Deeply into a particular topic or issue. My one will be the first one. It's actually going to be about the way in which the Enlightenment's characterization of the universe essentially has killed God, raised man to be his own maker, and what will happen when man is his own maker. And we're on the cusp of that now. We're at the point where we can genetically engineer future generations, and suddenly C.S. Lewis's observations in the abolition of man are suddenly incredibly pertinent. So, oh no, the power of future generations, or past generations over future generations, is going to essentially in some way cripple these future generations. And without realizing what we're depriving them of now, they will have no capacity for what the previous generations took for granted. And religion is a great example. I'm very aware that I should feel religious. Right? I'm very aware of this. And I no doubt that if I'd been born and raised 50, 70 years ago, something like that, I would have been religious, and I would have been probably very much in the doctrine of Christianity. But because I was born and raised in the time that I was, I'm not. And I can feel that something has been withheld. And it's not my parents' fault or anything like that. They were people of their time. They were completely.
So when your religion uses a traditional language, all right, it feels much more connected to God. When your religion is entirely translated into the vernacular, right, it's considerably diluted. So in the United States, Christianity is overwhelmingly an English language religion. English loves words like faith and love and hope and stuff like that, right? Judaism, traditional Judaism, is primarily a Hebrew language religion, which is all about halakha, right? Law and the pursuit of justice, right? Different languages produce different types of religion. Roman Catholicism that uses the Latin Mass is a different type of Catholicism than one that uses the vernacular. Judaism that primarily uses Hebrew rather than the vernacular is a different religion.
Normally, it was just the zeitgeist. It's just what everyone at their age did. And so they weren't doing anything unusual. And they're just working class, they were young working class people, and they had me. So, they didn't go to university, they didn't study any of this. It would be unreasonable to have expected them to have done otherwise. But we are still in the position where we are essentially whittling down the aspects of the human experience that we're passing on to future generations. And if that continues, well, eventually you're going to get very kind of stunted people who don't really have a very good grasp of the breadth and richness of what human life used to be. And this applies in everything. I mean, like, if you go back and read a book from 100 years ago, it's enchanting. The language they use is so much more broad, and it fills the space.
Sometimes it's enchanting. Probably more of the time, most people would experience it as a slog.
On the page, you know what I mean? It's like they'll use words that have multiple dimensions to them in the same word, whereas now.
So I need new language if I just say the same prayers, the same text over and over again, whether they're in Hebrew or they're in Greek or they're in English, right? These texts lose their meaning. So I need new paths to God, right? I need new paths to the transcendent, and I want these new paths to be within the Orthodox Judaism that I joined.
Now, we tend to use more clinical language that's thinned out, that has a very definite, specific meaning. And again, go back and read Churchill and then read any modern historian like Tom Holland or something. Tom Holland's a perfectly good writer, but you'll notice that it's just not as rich an experience as when you're reading someone like Churchill or A.J.P. Taylor or whoever. And that's because if you look at modern texts now, we have a much higher percentage of Latin words that are used in just everyday English. Whereas if you go back, 60, 70, 80 years ago.
Right. Americans were known prior to the 1970s as a plain-spoken people who would primarily use Anglo-Saxon direct, blunt language. And now our discourse, particularly amongst the educated, is much more convoluted.
We use many more Anglo-Saxon words, and the Anglo-Saxon words are often relational words that speak of a person, a place, a connection between them, and a moral judgment about the connection itself. So what happened between those people? And I actually did a little study on this a while ago. You can thank God for ChatGPT, right? It's really got its uses. And one of the uses is you can ask it to analyze a piece of text and tell you how many words in it are Latin etymology or Germanic etymology.
Wow.
And so it's brilliant. It's absolutely brilliant. And so if you take like George R.R. Martin and slap it in, he'll say, oh, it's about 50% Latin. He'll say it's about 50% Latin words. But if you put Tolkien in, he'll say, well, this is about 80% Anglo-Saxon words. And suddenly you realize, right, the language in the 20th century changed because of the advance of science. The scientific language is all in Latin. You'll notice all Latin words that we use, like derived from Latin. And what this means is these are words that are artificial, right? They're not normal in human life.
I have a shocking anecdote to share with you. Luigi Mangione did not have any family present in the courtroom. He's the killer of the healthcare CEO. But about 24 women waited in the cold for public seats in the courtroom to support him, many wearing face masks and some appearing visibly emotional as he entered the courtroom.
The Anglo-Saxon words are the ancient words that from the tribe. They're the words that speak to the lizard brain, the deep past of what it is to be a member of the English-speaking world. And
wow, Doooovid writes in the chat. Doovid writes, Doovid is unique. I admit that although immigration and multiculturalism benefits Jews, it does not largely benefit whites. I would disagree. I don't think it is at all that clear-cut, and I certainly wouldn't come down one side or the other. So I would say a more accurate analysis would be that immigration benefits some Jews and some whites, and immigration has little measurable effect on some Jews and some whites, and immigration is bad for some Jews and some whites.
That's why when you read one of these books from the Victorian era, you're just taken on this emotional and conceptual journey.
And I would suspect that most people who start reading books from the Victorian era are not going to be taken on such a journey, but a tiny minority of people may be.
Whereas when you read a book from modern day, it feels like you could be reading any kind of academic university text. It's very bland. It doesn't stir the soul. And you can, and if you go and
I mean, has this guy listened to songs by Anastasia? Has this guy listened to songs by Air Supply? Has he heard Making Love out of nothing at all? Does this man even know about the depths and profundity to be found in Kelly Clarkson's greatest hits? What the hell?
Actually look for this. You're constantly going to look for it. You suddenly see it's all around us. It's all around us. All of the words we use, and I do it myself. They're tepid. They're non-judgmental, abstract, objective words. It's like, okay, but nobody lives in that world. Like no human being lives in an objective world. You all live in subjective worlds in your head, through your eyes, using data through your senses, processed by your cultural matrix that is your consciousness. And that's why the Anglo-Saxon words sound romantic. That's why they sound heroic. That's why they make you feel like the world is actually kind of a magical thing. Whereas,
okay, so was that Sargon of Akkad excerpt, was that profound or pseudo-profound? So, right 1 in the chat if that was profound, and write 2 in the chat if that was pseudo-profound. I'm not sure, but I am leaning in one direction, but I don't want to bias your choice because I know how much respect you have for my keen powers of analysis. What the hell? I mean, what the hell?
But the conflict is real.
Yeah. I mean, is the Premier League title Liverpool's to lose? Other people are not willing to discuss such a hot button topic, but I've been a Liverpool supporter on a very mild level since about 1977, 78, 79. Feels like this year is the title. It's Liverpool's to lose for league. What the heck happened to Manchester City? People are afraid to talk about these hot button issues. But I'm gonna go there. Right? I'm not gonna dilly-dally, sit on the fence here. Right? I am going to go there. And F you if you can't handle the truth. Right? The truth is this version of Liverpool Football Club intellectually and analytically is the best Liverpool ever, not a close second. And I have supported Liverpool Football Club for years. If it weren't the truth, I wouldn't say it. Liverpool's whole system is as sharp as attack. Liverpool's offensive strategy is as sharp as attack. And F you if you can't handle the truth.
Challenge anyone here in this room to say they've seen a player with so much time to pick his cross as Trent had to cross into the box. It was just there was no one near him. It was
right. Another pulsating game on Sunday at Tottenham Stadium. Another win for Liverpool. Another 6 goals conceded for the Spurs. Is the title Liverpool's to lose? F you if you can't handle the truth. This is the best Liverpool ever. Analytically, strategically, cognitively, sharp as attack. F you if you can't handle the truth.
And everyone knows what a good crosser of the ball he is. It was so relaxed, and they were at home, and oh my word, it was disgraceful.
On that goal, I thought the very special thing the smart thing that Liverpool did was they sort of clustered their play to one side. So Gravenberch moved over to the left, and they moved themselves all
the best Liverpool ever. F you if you can't handle the truth.
Over to the left side, so that Trent was in space. So I thought that was a credit to how Liverpool manipulated space to create space for Trent Alexander-Arnold. But to your general point, I really do sympathise with Postecoglou.
So your life will likely be better if you are a sports fan, right? You'll get along better with other people. You'll be happier. You'll just have access to more of life. And offensive strategy in soccer is all about creating space. And defensive strategy in soccer is all about closing down space.
Because asking this team,
And this is the best Premier League play ever. And F you if you can't handle the truth. All right, Premier League play now is more intense. It is faster. It is more arduous. It's more demanding than we've ever seen before. Right? The Premier League has never been this sharp, this smart. This is the best Premier League play ever. And F you if you can't handle the truth.
Defence is inexperienced defence. To defend, I don't think necessarily leads to better outcomes than the one that they had by playing in this attacking way. They scored 3 goals, and you can get into the sort of how much sort of Liverpool were paying attention late on or whatever. But as in, to ask Jed Spence, Archie Gray, Dragoshin, Pedro Porro and Forster to defend, I mean, if they did that...
But is it not about defending as a team?
They're defenders.
No, yeah. They're not very good defenders. And
right, Tottenham, simply not very good defenders. They just have to score a lot of goals. And F you if